We are Newsroom. Hello and welcome once again from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, Evan Jansen. This show is always live and is broadcast from our studios right here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we're also live on YouTube between 9 and 12 every weekday morning. You can watch us back on the streaming facility. And we're asking you this question. Should we be concerned about the rise of political tensions here in South Africa? Yes, lots of inflammatory statements to and fro. There's a march today. There's also constitutional court hearings that will get underway. We'll be live there at about 10 o'clock, hopefully, when it gets underway this morning. But we ask you this serious question. Before we get into the day's work, though, let's get the morning's headlines with Elvis Preston.
Thank you, Eben. The top stories this morning: constitutional court hearings into the powers of the public protector get underway in Johannesburg today. President Jacob Zuma says people are happy with him and the government. Now, the search for 3 mine workers at the Lily mine in Barberton is entering a 5th day as hopes fade. Now, those are all your headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front. A very good morning to you.
Thank you very much, Elvis, and good morning to you all. Here's a sneak preview of what we've got for you in the sports later on today. Under pressure, Proteas with a mountain to climb as they face a second successive series defeat to England.
So hopefully we can put it all together at once, and we've got to do it consecutively, 3 matches in a row.
Now, SARO has decided not to allow CEO Yuri Roo to lead the search in choosing South Africa's next rugby coach. And in an exclusive interview on SABC News, Tokyo Sefwali insists that he's still in the FIFA race and is not concerned by CAF's decision not to back him. That's what we've got for you in the sports. I'll have more details for you at 10:20 or so. Back to you, Elvis.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this morning: President Jacob Zuma says people are happy with him and the government. He was visiting the business district in Marabastad in Pretoria yesterday ahead of his State of the Nation address on Thursday.
The smell of braai meat hangs in the air. So is the euphoria. It's not business as usual here in Marabastad. After all, the president's in town. From being bestowed with gifts to making small purchases. But behind the excitement, some serious concerns. From business funding to housing.
Let me get to the president.
And some only wish to get legal status in the country.
10 years in South Africa, 5 years in South Africa, 12 years, no papers.
Other people are very happy. Others, I went to the market, they are very happy. They say they are doing business, they are happy, everything is going very well. They are happy that the government is looking after them. They are happy with the government. They are happy with the president. Everything they could say. So all of that was important for me, because at times, you guys, what you write. You write from other sources. This was a direct source.
The president has found solace, but beyond this, difficult challenges. Paving the way to grow the economy, dealing with the worst drought while addressing the water shortage. Arguably, the biggest challenge will be to finish the State of the Nation address uninterrupted. The EFF says on Thursday evening it will be demanding answers why the president fired former Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene. However, the president has put on a brave face.
I've been always upbeat. Always.
Meanwhile, controversies, the Military Veterans Association has come out in support of the ANC, President Jacob Zuma and the Gupta family. The association says recent utterances by opposition parties are misleading and seek to tarnish the image of the ANC and President Zuma. It says that 2 South African families own 50% of the wealth of the country, while the Guptas own less than 1% of the shares on the JSE. The Constitutional Court hearings into the powers of the Public Protector will get underway in Johannesburg today. The Economic Freedom Fighters and the Democratic Alliance will argue that President Jacob Zuma must comply with the Public Protector's findings that he is obliged to repay a portion of the money spent on non-security features at his Nkandla home. They have rejected the president's proposal to settle the matter after the Auditor General and the Finance Minister determine how much he owes. Johannesburg authorities have given the economic freedom fighters permission for 8,000 people to march to the Constitutional Court today. Now, for an update on the story, we now cross live to our reporter Eldrin Sampear, who's going to be covering the Constitutional Court case. Eldrin, a very good morning to you, and can you tell us what time is the hearing supposed to start?
Well, good morning, Elvis. The hearing starts at about 10 o'clock. That's when the Constitutional Court judges will be walking through and sitting on the benches and listening to the arguments that will be meted out by those representing the 6 parties that are part of this case. We have the President's legal representatives that are already there, as well as those representing the DA, as well as the EFF. And just quickly, just to show you what's happening outside the court, remember that EFF members are expected to march here on Constitutional Hill. We have a security detail, a lot of security officers around the area. We see that right now there was an Inyala that just passed with barbed wire to make sure that there is control of the crowd that's expected to be coming here. We expect thousands of EFF members. And as I can see right now is that the Constitutional Court falls under the Johannesburg jurisdiction, which means it is the JMPD that's supposed to make sure that the area is secured. But I see that they have called for reinforcement. They've asked the EMPD, which is from the Ekurhuleni municipality, to come and help out as they try and control the access to the area, as thousands of EFF members are expected. Earlier on, I saw some DA members as well coming through to the court.
Are there any ANC supporters in the area?
Well, unfortunately, no ANC supporters that we've seen earlier on. I spoke to the spokesperson of the ANC, Zizi Kodwa, and he said that they're currently in Cape Town. Remember that they are preparing for the State of the Nation address, which will be taking place on Thursday. So most of them in Cape Town. So chances are probably there might be some members of the ANC that will be coming through, but we have no confirmation whatsoever if any will be doing that.
Now, just briefly, Eldrin, now we know it's supposed to start at around about 10 o'clock, and we're going to hear all the arguments, but are all the parties present already?
Well, yes, we have the lawyers of the President, the legal team of the President. They're currently in the court. We also have the legal representatives of the DA as well as the EFF. We know that the Corruption Watch has also been granted access to make submissions in the Constitutional Court hearing. And then we'll have the lawyers representing the Office of the Public Protector. Remember that the Public Protector asked to be part of this case because she feels that whatever ruling comes of this case will have implications for office. We know what the issue is at stake right now is the arguments around the powers of the Public Protector, whether the Public Protector's office is equivalent to an ombudsman office, and whether remedial action that she sets out are just that, remedial actions. And I was indicating earlier on as well while speaking to Leanne is that what we should remember is that we had the High Court during the Hlaudi Mutwening matter, which ruled and said that actually the powers of the speaking on the powers of the Public Protector, saying that the recommendations that the Public Protector makes are not binding. Well, that matter was then appealed. So the highest court right now in standing that has ruled on the powers of the Public Protector is the Supreme Court of Appeal, which indicated that the powers or the recommendations of the Public Protector cannot be ignored.
Eldrin Sampear, thank you so much for that report. Now, Tomahole Moshlali is one of our other reporters at the EFF March, and he joins us now to give us an update on that march. A very good morning to you, Tomahole, and can you give us an update as to what is happening there?
A very good morning to you, Elvis. The situation here at Mary Fitzgerald Square in the Johannesburg CBD can be described as lively. EFF supporters have been trickling in, and as can be expected, they are decked out in full party regalia, as you can see behind me here, wearing their green berets and making a lot of noise for the passing motorists here, creating quite a lot of spectacle. We are expecting well in the thousands of EFF supporters to converge here and make their way to the Constitutional Court where the matter is being heard. As you can hear behind me, they have been chanting, pay back the money, pay back the money. This is their mantra, and this has been the mantra they've been carrying here throughout the morning. Buses, as I can speak to you, are starting to make their way through here, and EFF leadership is saying that they are busing supporters from right across Gauteng and as far as field as the Free State and Mpumalanga as well. We are expecting to get underway within the next 40 minutes or so, because the march is scheduled to kick off here at Mary Fitzgerald Square and make its way to the Constitutional Court at around 10 a.m. So as far as everything goes in terms of logistics, we have Metro Police as well as SAPS members out in full force, and they have said that they will tolerate no disruptions to businesses as well as traffic. They are expecting the EFF to stay within the bounds of their route, and the EFF in itself, it says that as based on marches from last year where they held the Economic Freedom March, their members will remain disciplined and there will be no disruptions to onlookers as well as to motorists. So that is the situation from Mary Fitzgerald Square in Johannesburg, where the march is expected to kick off in about 40 minutes.
Yeah, we'll keep you updated as to how the march developed, but also what happens inside the Constitutional Court. Will be live inside the court at about 10 o'clock. That's in about 15 minutes' time, so stay with us. However, we also have some other news. Now, earlier this month, the eThekwini Municipality appeared before the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities. The municipality was summoned because it was accused and found guilty of recycling graves in the region due to a general lack of burial space. The Commission has then given the municipality a stern warning to stop recycling graves, or they will have to face the full might of the law. Now, I'm joined this morning by the Commission's chairperson, Tokum Kwanazi Kaluva. She's with us this morning. Very good morning, ma'am. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
This is a very sensitive issue. Just give us your overview of the decision to firstly probe the eThekwini municipality on this matter.
We got several complaints from people of eThekwini municipality. Some of them would say they went to their parents' graves and they found that somebody else has been buried there, and sometimes there's even a tombstone. And when they acquired, they were told that no, the time had lapsed for your parents. 10 years is the maximum time. Then you have to pay to rent because they lease the graves. So you are leasing the grave, and if you don't pay up in 10 years' time, then you are asked to leave, and your bones will be pushed down and the grave will be given to somebody else.
Now, you are there to promote cultural, religious and or protect cultural,
Yes.
religious and linguistic communities. How do you view this kind of practice? Because in a traditional sense, there are many rituals that people practice.
We see this as a violation of the constitutional rights to cultural and religious belief systems, because their rights are being violated. When I come to my mother's grave, and it's no longer Mkwanas, and it's now Mkize, and I have to do my rituals. And how do I do my rituals if now there are two people buried in one grave who are not even related for that matter? So for us, we're saying the municipality must try by all means to say to the family, do you have a family member who's buried in the eThekwini municipality area? Then take that body and put it in that particular grave where there's a relationship between the deceased and the one in the grave. Not to say today we're recycling grave 1 to 50, whether we are related or not, we'll just dump you in there.
What has been the reaction of the municipality to the work that you've been doing?
We have been talking to them for quite a while in terms of, let's talk about this thing. We know you have a problem with the space, but it has come to a stage where we feel we're not being taken seriously by the municipality. Hence, we have given them an ultimatum to say, if they do not start dealing with people's rights in a constitutionally sound way, we will have to go to court. And then there would have to be a court finding. That will create a crisis for them, because then it will be stop doing what we are doing, and they won't have a plan. So we've said to them, develop a plan. Actually, the time for you to do that has expired. Now start talking to people. Ask them, do you have somebody where we can put this one? So for us, we're saying they must move and move fast. People's constitutional rights cannot be trampled upon while we watch.
Now, it's an open secret, South Africa is fast running out of burial space. As the CRL, what kind of solutions would you like to see, or what kind of solutions are you thinking of to deal with the problem of running out of burial space?
We're saying there are several options. One of them is to bury relatives together, families in one grave.
Yeah.
And the second one, for those people whose religion and culture allows it, is to cremate. And to then look at other alternatives, so long as your cultural and religious belief systems allow you to go that route. But we're saying, let's not force people into a cremation situation that goes against their culture and religion.
It's always a very difficult concept to even discuss, because there's such tensions and passion involved in it. But do you think there should be a discussion about trying to maybe persuade people to think about alternatives?
I think that discussion has already started. A lot of other African people have already told their families they want to be cremated. So it should be a choice that, the person, while still alive, would say, when I pass on, please cremate me. But it shouldn't be a municipality's decision that you should be cremated.
The way forward, what would you like to see happen in the short, medium, and in the long term?
In the medium term, short term, relative to relative, families together. In the long term, government needs to find space. The most ideal situation, one body, one grave. That's the most ideal situation. The land issue needs to be resolved.
Yeah, it's a pressing issue for all South Africans, it seems. Even after our lives, we still need land.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us for joining us today. That's the chairperson of the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities here in South Africa, Toko Mkwanazi Kaluva, joining us here in studio to talk about this. It's something we'll continue a conversation on, of course. Today we ask you a different question. It's a more politically conscious question. Should we be concerned about the rise in political tensions in South Africa? Remember, it is an election year. It's going to be a hotly contested election this year. What do you think? Should we be concerned or not? Of course, we'll also be at the Constitutional Court a little bit later for what could be a landmark ruling. But we continue our theme this morning, which is around the shortage of burial space here in South Africa. Elvis has more.
Now, a study conducted by the South African Local Government Association, SALGA, in conjunction with the CRL, the University of South Africa, UNISA, and the CSIR in 2012, indicated that cities are in need of suitable land for cemeteries. Now, most metropolitan municipalities have less than 50% of cemeteries that still have capacity for more burials. Now, apart from high demand for in-ground burial over cremation, which causes high demand for cemetery space, the question is, should cemeteries also be located on unsuitable landscapes? Now, from the South African Cemetery Association, we have Alan Buff. He's also from the Johannesburg City Parks and the Zoo. Mr. Buff, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning.
First and foremost, what is the stand from the South African Cemetery Association regarding land for burial use, and can any land be allocated for burials?
Well, first of all, land that's allocated for cemeteries has got to go through the EIA process, Environmental Impact Assessment process, geological process. So you can't just choose land where you want to have land. It's got to go through all the environmental processes to make sure it is suitable for burial and for no pollutants to actually do any damage to the environment. Now, what we've been looking at over many, many years here is that the demographics of Johannesburg and the population density of Johannesburg, but the country, is actually expanded. And if you look, just an example of Johannesburg, a few years ago, we had 2 million people. Now we're on 4.5. And it's estimated by the year 2020 that would be close to 6 to 7 million. Now, we have to make provision for all the religious groups, all the cultural groups, to say, what do we actually want? Now, this has gone on throughout the country. And we've had numerous research institutes doing things, such as SALGA and so forth, and we've been involved with education. So education is very important. So what we've come up with is to say, right, when we're allocating land, be it for housing, be it for the people, be it for recreation, you've got to have X amount for each function. And we're looking at more land to be allocated, not just for cemeteries, but those cemeteries must be built in such a way that they become part of the ecosystem, part of the effects of global warming. So we've got to be looking at the bigger picture. Now,
so it's not just taking any land and bury somebody there?
No, not at all, not at all. Now, what we're looking at here is to say, right, what is ideally suitable, which can be burial? Now, burials have been taking place for centuries, yes, but what we've been doing over many years now is to say not only first burials, but the family can have a second burial in the same grave. The family can have a third burial in the same grave. But you then go too deep because there's lack of oxygen and bacteria there, which would then not be conducive to decomposition. So 3 burials is quite sufficient in one grave. However, if the family so wish to contain the culture, to retain the culture, to keep everything in that one grave, the family then got the right to ask for a reduction burial. Reduction burial is sustainable burials. Otherwise, the contents of the grave is carefully taken out, placed into another smaller coffin, and placed back into the same grave. Then the family can continue on infinitum, reusing the same grave, holding the culture and family values within that grave. Now, that is sustainable utilization. Yeah, other alternatives we have, of course, is cremation, which is around 10 to 15% of the population. Now, there are other methodologies. The sea burial, which has been approved. That's a different method altogether. Yes, you have to go.
What does that entail?
It means that you can bury the cadaver, the deceased, out at sea, but it has to be done officially. It is now law, and you can go out approximately 2 to 3 kilometers out away from the coastline, but they must know the routes of the currents, etc., exactly where they can have this. So that's already been approved in the law. So there are numerous methodologies. Now, what we have to look at very carefully, though, is the population. If you take the various major cities that have actually became really populated, and the amount of space that's been available for all these graves all these years is now diminishing. So we have to find alternative methodologies or more land to actually use. The government's got to come in on this one and play a role, because there is land available outside of the municipal areas. You can't have the local cemeteries serving just the local community. From that, we have to go one step further and say, should we combine municipalities to try and share resources? So there are numerous areas.
Because that was my next question. A lot of people would say there's ample land outside of the city, so why are we not having more land available for burial space?
Well, this is what we've got to do now. We've been at various meetings over the last 3 or 4 years. We've brought different people on, been SALGA, be the different institutes, and the South African Cemetery Association. We're now looking at bringing on people such as the undertakers to advise undertakers and funeral directors of the methodologies, the different methods that's been used. They're well conversed with this, but they must converse with the actual clients. We've actually got to be now coming up to government and say, please, there's no more sufficient land in the various municipal areas. Can we have now land which belongs to province? But it's got to be outside the municipal areas. And that is where the problem comes. People do not want to move outside of the area. We're very fortunate in one way that nearly 50% of the population go back to their roots. But the day will come when those people do not go back to their roots. And that is when the land shortage will really cripple.
Do you find that there's a lot of challenges and obstacles towards the alternatives that is being presented to communities in terms of culture? That is the obstacle, perhaps?
Not really. We don't force anything onto any community member. It's totally up to the person the family member who wants anything to be done. In the cremation, for example, we can't force people to cremate. That is your choice. It's your choice of burial. It's your choice of cremation. but only around 15% maximum throughout the country actually do cremations based on religious belief. But taking the Indian belief, first of all, the Hindu belief, at one stage everybody used to be buried, but due to shortage of space, the religious people got together. This was quite a few years ago, centuries ago, and by doing that, they actually come up with the whole cremation process. So you can see things can happen.
Mr. Buff, thank you so much for your time and joining us here. Now that was Alan Buff from the South African Cemeteries Association giving us his take on the available land in the country and what can be done to solve the issue. Over to you, Eben.
Yeah, thanks, Lois. Now, this morning, the Constitutional Court, its hearing is expected to settle a dispute over whether President Jacob Zuma is obliged to pay back money for non-security features at his home in Nkandla. There's been lots of action on social media, as you can expect. We're all counting down to 10 o'clock for when we'll be going live inside the court. But let's have a look at some of the comments. Sure talks about once and for all South Africa's Constitutional Court to rule on the powers of the public protector. Epic. Yes, it is going to be epic indeed. Godfrey Albertine. Today we are all going to be Constitutional Court judges. Yes, the country will be transfixed then. President Oshantosh says, wishing President Zuma good luck on his Nkandla hearing Constitutional Court. Some of us have never stepped in court since 1979. That's from Jose Eduardo dos Santos in Angola. Then Sarah Burford talks about Constitutional Court's Nkandla decision today. This will be interesting. It will be more than interesting. Bongani says today is that time of the cycle when we average citizen become the Constitutional Court law experts. That one from Bongani. Now let's take a quick look at our picker that day. This one comes from Brett Mendoza and it's captioned amazing photo Imogen storm, it says, of the Hove Promenade. That's King Alfred. Yep. Who says that sea levels are not rising. There you have evidence. We have more and more evidence of it every day. But let's take a quick look at what's happening in the world. Here are the front pages. The Times in Europe reports that a dedicated Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals inspector is feared to have been swept to his death in the sea as he attempted to rescue a group of stranded gannets shortly before Storm Imogen battered the country with the strongest winds to hit the United Kingdom mainland this winter. What a picture. Then the Tehran Times says, during an acclaimed ceremony yesterday, President Hassan Rouhani awarded medals of merit to Iranian nuclear negotiators who brokered a historic nuclear deal with major world powers. Then finally, the Wall Street Journal reports that Syrian government forces backed by a Russian airstrike seized more territory from rebels in efforts to completely take back the town of Aleppo. That's what's happening internationally. This is what's happening in the court here in South Africa. Let's take a quick roundup of that. We'll start in Pretoria, where cardiologist Wouter Basson is expected back in the High Court. He claimed that the process followed by the Health Professionals Council of South Africa when it found him guilty of unethical conduct was not fair. He was charged with the production of deadly drugs and other substances to be used against enemies of the apartheid state. Then in Bloemfontein, 2 people charged with drug trafficking and possession of drugs worth more than 8 million rand are expected to appear in the Magistrates Court for their bail application. Also in Durban, 5 learners accused of gang raping a 15-year-old fellow pupil in class are expected to appear in their local court as well. It's a story that's caught the headlines here in South Africa. Then we go down south to Cape Town, where a decision on whether the Tim Noakes hearing into alleged misconduct is expected to continue today. The Health Committee is expected to make a decision on whether to grant Noakes' legal team access to documents that form part of a preliminary investigation against him. Time for us to take a break. When we come back, we talk to the MK Military Veterans Association about our question of the day. Don't go away.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we have been banned.
It didn't happen to me on that day because I was already in jail when it happened.
I was scared that when I get back to Joburg, I was going to be arrested. Well, I wasn't. Who are you asking? You're looking at me?
Yes, Zubaydah, I'm talking to you.
So the old fuddy-duddies like Dennis and me will remain there.
I just want to say, Joe, that the thing about... damn, go on, and it's coming back to me.
So much more than just the Legal and Rights show. Join Dumile Mateza every Sunday at 2 p.m. only on the SABC News channel.
Welcome back. You're still with Newsroom here on SABC News. Now, the Umkhonto weSizwe Military Veterans Association has called on all South Africans and political formations to refrain from inciting racial and xenophobic conflict. In a statement released yesterday, the MKMVA said recent utterances around the Gupta family and their business interest in South Africa amounted to petty politicking that threatened stability and security. Today, the Gupta family had to beef up security at their Saxonwold home ahead of a march to the Constitutional Court here in Johannesburg. Now, I'm joined in studio by the leader of the Umkhonto weSizwe Military Veterans Association, Mr. Kebi Mapatswe. He joins us from our parliamentary studios in Cape Town. A very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Morning, sir, and the viewers.
If I can start with what is happening today, sir. In the context of the Constitutional Court hearing that's going ahead here in Johannesburg, your reaction to that and then to the various protest marches that we see also happening today?
Look, I think the opposition parties, they've got nothing to offer to the people of South Africa. They've been using the Nkandla issue as their political tool. Now that the president has said he's prepared to pay the money, for a long time he has been saying that as long as the correct institution can tell him how much he should pay for those upgrades at Nkandla. It's not a new thing. Now the political opposition parties, they are now using this thing as a campaign. So we are happy that the president has taken this decision, and it will bring the issue of Nkandla to an end, and we know for a fact that after that the political parties will not be having anything to campaign or to offer our people.
I'd like to refer back to your statement that you released yesterday. It was quite an impassioned plea to South Africa and political formations. You talked about petty politicians stirring xenophobic and racial tensions in South Africa. Just qualify what you meant with those words in the statement that you released.
What we're saying as MKMV is that recently we've been bombarded with lies, dishonesty and propaganda against the Gupta family and also about the president. So, but as we are saying as MKMV, we are saying this thing is racism, this thing has got the elements of xenophobic, and as South Africa, we want to build a united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous South Africa. So when leaders of opposition parties, they issue such statements that are threatening people who are doing business in South Africa. The Guptas are South Africans. They've been here for a long time, doing business like any other South African here in South Africa. Especially they were benefiting the South Africans. So it shows that some of these political opposition parties, they are benefiting somewhere from these other big cartels. Because if you check the issue of this deal of Glencore, it has been an on and off going deal. When we heard about that as MKMVA, we convened the Gupta's family to explain to us what is happening about this propaganda. And yesterday we met with them in the morning, and they explained to us, and we satisfied ourselves that This thing is nothing else, but it's about perceptions that are not there. It's racism, it's xenophobia, and we call upon our people in South Africa not to listen to these statements and propaganda that has been leveled against the Gupta families. If you check at the Eskom deal, as it happened now, the Tegeta company, it's supplying 1.3% of the coal to Eskom, and the other 80%, it's supplied by 5 cartels. And we're very happy that the CEO of Eskom has been brave enough to tell them where to back off, because these cartels were supplying Eskom by 980 rand per ton. And they were saying with the new deal, they want to go to the extent of 1,360. Whereas the present companies that are supplying, including Tegeta now, they are supplying low beyond 500 rands per ton. This shows that these companies are ripping our country off.
You also mentioned the media in the statement that you released yesterday, and you talk about the role of the South African media putting us into conflict as a country. Just tell us what you mean by that.
What I'm saying is that the media, instead of telling the truth, like we did, we convened the Guptas and asked them what is happening. So we want to encourage some of the media houses, before they can publish anything, let them go and get the facts, because it is the requirement of the media to get the other side of the story and investigate whether this thing is true or not. So we are saying that they are fueling this thing of supporting other political opposition parties against the Gupta's family, which is very wrong. It's unacceptable. They should have gone to the Guptas, met with them, and get an explanation what is happening about this deal. So SMKMV was saying really, other media houses, they must be patriotic, get their facts correct, and present our country as a developmental state going forward, that we want to build a strong economy in our country, rather than peddling lies and telling all sorts of lies about the Guptas and also about the President of the Republic of South Africa, Comrade President Jacob Zuma.
Are you concerned that these kinds of conflicts and the level of tension that political formations are using or rising in an election year is very dangerous for South Africa?
Indeed, it is very dangerous for South Africa to have responsible statements by other political parties. But what we are aware of is that they know for a fact that through democratic processes, they will never be able to remove the African National Congress from power. The only way that they want to remove the African National Congress from power is to use this anti-majoritarian rule tactics of rendering our government ungovernable through violence means, which we think it will never succeed in South Africa. South Africans are very politically matured. They know the truth. They know what this government has done, and they are ready for local government elections, just like any other person in South Africa who is ready for these local government elections. Those who do not want to participate in the local government elections because they know that they're going to lose, they must stop inciting violence against other people in South Africa. Our rule of law must be implemented as a matter of must.
In conclusion, we saw overnight there was an attack on the house of the ANC Youth League leader, Colin Maine. This kind of violent outburst seems to be the way that we do business in the political space here in South Africa. Now, as the MKMVA, how do you view that, and what do you think should be your duty to try and deal with this kind of behavior?
We will, as MKMVA, encourage our people not to engage in any violent matters. We are experienced, we know what war is, and we know how bad war is. So we don't want our country to go back to that state of apartheid or to what is happening in other African countries. So we wanted to say to the state authorities that they must make sure that they arrest those who attacked the house of the president of the ANC Youth League, and we must call upon all South Africans to desist on these forms of trying to render South Africa a violent state. They will not succeed. As MKMVA, we will continue with our political work, speaking our view that war, it is not good for South Africa now. We want to build a united, non-racial, non-sexist, and a prosperous South Africa. And it needs all of us, citizens of South Africa, and all these other political opposition parties, we come together and build a better South Africa for all of us.
Mr. Mapacho, I thank you very much for joining us today. That's the leader of the Umkhonto weSizwe Military Veterans Association here in South Africa, talking to us about a whole range of issues. Of course, our question of the day, I asked him directly about a question of the day before we carry on with the show. This is, are we concerned, or should we be concerned, rather? Should we be concerned about the rise of political tensions here in South Africa? It seems the violent incidents are the order of political business. We've got a march going on in Johannesburg today, and of course at 10 o'clock this morning we'll be inside the Constitutional Court for that landmark ruling on whether President Jacob Zuma should pay back some of the upgrades at his Nkandla home. But we continue with our show this morning. Elvis has more.
South Africa's 9 provinces are running out of burial space at a time when deeply rooted custom demands that everyone have a sacred dedicated plot in a graveyard. It's an age-old belief among our black people that deceased people are their ancestors and their graves must be highly respected. Now, when a person dies, it is believed that they are going to their family members who went before them, and their graves are sacred. Another alternative, of course, is to grave recycle, or to recycle the graves, and that is cremation as well. Now, to talk about some of the alternatives to the conventional burial methods, we are joined from Polokwane by the president of the Limpopo Unified Traditional Health Practitioners Association, Dr. Sylvester Nhlati. Doctor, a very good morning to you and welcome. Doctor, can you hear me?
Hello, yes?
Yes, Doctor. Dr. Nhlati, welcome. Now, Doctor, from a traditional point of view, what's your opinion to the recycling of graves and the stand taken by the CRL to call on their eThekwini mayor to appear before them on that grave recycling issue?
Thank you very much for inviting me in this sensitive topic that we have to discuss. As a traditional healer and a leader of an organization in our SADC region, you know, it's unfortunate that this kind of thing is going to happen, or maybe some of the municipality, they have had some bylaws, or they want to have some bylaws. Unfortunately, we traditional health practitioners or traditional healers, people who follow our culture, our religion, and our beliefs, we don't believe that it will be a proper thing, because you must remember, we traditionally healers or people who understand or follow our culture and our tradition, normally when we have to do something, we need to be guided by our ancestors. Now, to recycle the grave, or maybe to bury another individual on top of the other one, that is a real something that we will not allow to happen in our graves, because that is going to create a serious problem. You know, you remember when we bury our loved ones in our graves, what we have to do, we take our children. Even if we don't take our children, sometimes we have to perform some rituals or a ceremony. We have to go to a grave of my grandpa. Now, it will be a sad thing that when I go to a grave of my grandpa, I find out my grandpa is no more there. He has been removed. Somebody is there, or maybe 3 other bodies, they've been buried on top of my grandpa. Now, how do I perform my ritual? So, you know, I think the municipality, the government, and the other structures, and we traditional healers, we're supposed to sit down and try to find a solution. What will be the best way of us burying our loved ones? If I can give you a very practical example, you know, everybody that is in Gauteng, they are not from Gauteng. They come from different places, from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, from Malawi, from Limpopo, etc., etc. Now, the municipality, or maybe the senior people in government, they should sit down and try to find a better way to say, okay, you residing here in Soweto, but you are not original from Soweto. And you must remember, in our villages, in our rural areas where we have chiefs, that they are custodian of some of the land, there's a lot of space there. So why should we, all of us, force ourselves to bury our loved ones in Avalon, etc., etc.? We're supposed to be having power or being empowered to educate our community to say that if someone passes on, one of your relatives, the best way that you should do is to take the body, go and bury the person at the next of your grandpa or you know, at a place where you can visit your grave without interfering with anybody, religious or believers.
Now, Doctor, most municipalities, as you know, are running out of burial land, and we are caught here in a catch-22 situation. What do you think is the way out of the cremation, and if recycling is out as well as cremation is out of the question?
Well, we traditional healers, traditional practitioners, we don't believe on that. I think the best way is for us and the commission and the municipalities and the government and the structures involved in this program, some of the municipalities, we have to sit down and try to find the best way, not to recycle. We cannot do that. Or maybe not to cremate. You know, some of people, they will say, when I pass on, I want my body to be cremated. That is not, it's fine. Somebody will say so, but you will have some consequences after that, because you can cremate the person, but you know, the forefathers of that person that has been cremated, they will come back to you to say why you did this, why you did that, and that person is no longer there to take responsibility. So we, as if we're still alive, we must find a better way, a best solution, that to say all the municipalities should have a database, you know, to say, 30 family, you are here, but you are from Limpopo. You know, when your grandchild pass on, your wife or yourself pass on, the best way of doing this is to transport the body back home. That is the best way. You can remember a lot of senior people who died here in Johannesburg or in Pretoria or somewhere in the big towns. They were taken back so they can bury it to nearby their relatives, so that the grandchildren or everybody can see the grave, they can go and visit, etc. But if we force to recycle, or maybe the municipality just happen to pass a bylaw and then say they're going to do this, they will have a serious consequences after that. That's an unfortunate thing that really we will encourage the municipality to sit down and discuss with us or with everybody, with the commission, so that we can find a better way.
What do you say to the argument that people are saying the body is dust to dust and there's nothing more? The soul is either gone to heaven or to hell, and there is only this little bit of dust left in there, so it's no longer just a grave it's a grave that can be reutilized. What do you say to that argument?
Well, I did not hear clearly your question, but I think you were mentioning that when someone goes to the grave and find that your relative one is no longer there, somebody is there. You know, the municipality, they know, they have a record of everybody. If the municipality think that, no, it's about time that your period will expire for you to own the grave, they should, in fact, trace the person, trace the relative to say, okay, this is the time that your time will expire. So the relative, they will decide. Maybe they will exhume the body, they take the bones to go and bury them at home or where else. Not a municipality decided, okay, now it's 10 years, now let's just remove and put somebody else. That is unfortunate. So I will, in fact, encourage the municipality or the leaders of the municipality, the commission also, we traditional healers, to sit down and try to find a better way, because that is unfortunate, because even if the municipality do that, the municipality will have also serious consequences. You can see what kind of environment we are living in now. You know, we have this climate change. We have a lot of things. People, they don't respect in one another. You know, lot of killing, lot of all sort of things. Yes. It's because of we people, we don't follow our tradition and our culture. We happen just to dump all our culture, and then we say, no, because I'm a senior person in the municipality, I can just pass a law, and then we do like this. So it's unfortunate, but I would like to really encourage municipalities and the commission, etc., so that we can sit down and find a better solution, not to dump our people, not to just dig and take somebody else.
That's where we got to leave it. That was Dr. Sylvester Slati, the president of the Limpopo Unified Traditional Health Practitioners Association, chatting to us about burial space. Over to you, Evan.
Yeah, thanks, Elvis. Now, the shortage of burial space is becoming more pronounced in South Africa's metros. The coastal eThekwini municipality has since 2014 toyed with the idea of cremating paupers and replacing tombstones with groundstones now. Such is the extent of the landlessness problem. The Ekurhuleni municipality is also experiencing a shortage of land to the extent that, well, been lobbying business or lobbying communities to consider cremation as an alternative to a traditional burial. Now, in our Durban studio, Temangozi Ngobo is the head of Parks, Recreation, Cemeteries and Culture Department in the eThekwini Metro. Very good morning to you, sir, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning to you and your viewers. Thank you.
And then here in the Johannesburg studio with me, we have Sanelisiwe Mongai, who's the Ekurhuleni's head of cemeteries. A very good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for
If I can start in Durban, I'd like to go to the eThekwini municipality, and I'd like you to know what your position is. Firstly, regarding to the ruling by the Commission for Culture, Religious and Linguistic Communities that you should stop with the practice of recycling graves.
Yes, I think the meeting with the Commission made, I think, quite a significant progress, in the sense that it bridged a gap of understanding between us and the Commission, and we agreed more specifically on two things. One is that what we have been doing in terms of the reusage of graves is not something out of the law, it is within the law. And secondly, the Commission also recognized that we have a serious problem. It's a real problem that we don't have a shortage of space. But now, in terms of the ultimatum that they gave us, I must state up front, firstly, that as a government arm or an institution, would like to see ourselves being a promoter of the Constitution and all other laws of the land. But then in this particular case, I think if we're to implement and we're prepared to do so, it will place quite a very serious restrictions on us to perform our task or to provide this service. We'll be placed, therefore, between a very hard place and a rock, in the sense that if we're to go ahead and implement the ultimatum of the Commission, that will mean that we won't be able to provide the service to at least about 80% of the population of this city. And I'll try and explain why. Firstly, we've been told that grave sites must only be used between or among families. This therefore assumes that you can time death. You can, for instance, say to a person, if a member of a family dies now, the other member must wait until it's 10 years after, so that you can use then the very same grave site. So we know that you cannot time death. So that is going to be problem number one that you are going to be facing. Yeah. And then number two, we may then have to choose, if we cannot bury those people or provide grave sites, whether what is important is the observation, which we do respect, of the cultural beliefs and religious systems, or it will be about the disposal of the human remains. I think that is where we are going to be placed in a difficulty by the Commission. But then also, if we're to implement, my view or our view is that we'll then have to introduce some chemical processes so that you can accelerate the rate of decomposition of the remains, so that instead of waiting for 10 years, for instance, we then shorten that period so that the gravesite can then be made available within a short space of time to another family member who may need it at that particular time.
Thank you. That's eThekwini municipality. Now, Ekurhuleni's representative, Sanelisiwe, just give us your overview as to where you are with this problem and what are you putting forward to kind of deal with the running out of space?
Okay, currently in Ekurhuleni, out of our 63 cemeteries, 42 of them are inactive, which means that they are full. We experience a rapid increase in the burial rate, and our cemeteries are highly reaching capacity. Even the 21 that we have, there's about 8 to 10 of them that will be filled in the next 10 years. So we have started a few years ago with the alternative burial strategy, whereby we give communities options other than the normal interment, which means that besides the normal interment that we know, which is the first interment on the ground, we also promote second interment and third interment. And then there's also cremation on our options. So people have 3 alternative burial methods other than the traditional in-ground burial for only one person.
Temakosi, if I can come down to you in Durban quickly, just tell us in your discussions with communities about implementing alternative burial methods, what's the reaction from them thus far?
We started way back in the year 2002. We have consulted widely. We had 2 national conferences on this matter. We have been to any church that you may think of here in Durban. We have consulted with traditional healers and so forth. Firstly, when we started, there was almost what I would call a violent opposition to the proposals and even denial of the problem that we had. But then today we have seen a turnaround because there has been quite an increase, especially among the black communities, of numbers of people who are resorting to cremation as a resolution of this problem. And also, the majority of families, in actual fact, or individuals, do understand there is no burial space, and therefore they are also agreeing to reuse graves, even though they are not necessarily part of their families who have been buried in that gravesite. So there has been quite a very good understanding, and I think, in my view, are now beginning to reconcile. It's still going to take a long time. The opinions, the views out there, and the passions that have been expressed by people are now beginning to understand that even though we do respect culture and religious belief, but this debate, this issue is not necessarily about that. It is about the fact that there is no burial space, and then we need to do something quite drastic about it to resolve the problem.
If I can come to you and quickly talk about your discussion with communities and then also the recycling of graves within the Ekurhuleni municipality, that process, is it frowned upon?
The process of cremation is the one that has not been yet fully accepted by the community, especially the black community. However, the second burial or the third burial on the same grave by the same family is highly being used by the community. And then the issue of recycling. As the Metro, we are still looking at recycling, but we haven't even started, we are still doing research. We haven't even started to implement or having policies or bylaws around that.
In conclusion, I'd like to come to you, Temakosi, and just tell us about, what about other ideas? What about mausoleums, or what do you see as a solution in the short term?
The solution in the short term, there's about 3 that I will pick up. One, the combination of cremation and burial. So our view is that to solve or to adapt to what the Commission wants, we may have to resort firstly to burial for the first few years, and then after some few years, then we exhume the remains, cremate them, and provide a smaller burial site. In that way, then we should be able to reuse those grave sites for other families. Then 2, we may have to look into sea burial, since it has now been accepted in South Africa that it is one way of disposal of the remains. And then the third one would be to consider the mausoleums. We have been studying this over the last few years, and it seems to us that it could be one of the methods that you can use to resolve the problems that we have now. But in the main, all of these will need education, because it seems to me that even traditional healers and many other people who are taken as custodians of other religious beliefs and customs, that they now need to redefine their role. Instead of being transmitters of these belief systems, they must be intercessors to tell people that things are changing, things have changed, and therefore we also need to adapt.
Well, I thank you very much for joining us. Temakosi Ngoba is the head of Parks, Recreation, Cemeteries and Culture at the eThekwini Metro, and then here in Johannesburg, Sanelisiwe Monghoai is Ekurhuleni's head of cemeteries. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, ma'am.
Thanks, sir.
Well, let's go. Well, we're still waiting for the Constitutional Court to get underway. As soon as it does, it's supposed to start in 5 seconds, but it's not. Let's go to Elvis for a quick news update before we go there.
It's 10:00 hours Central Africa time on this Tuesday, the 9th of February 2016. This is Newsroom on SABC News, Channel 404, Jumbo Africa, and a very warm welcome to the second hour. I'm Elvis Preston. I'll be with you until 12 o'clock, and you have to stay with us as we broadcast live from our Auckland Park studios, Johannesburg, South Africa, to the rest of the African continent. Streaming live also on YouTube, with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Well, you can send us your comments on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom as we ask you that question. What do you make of, or should we be concerned about, the rise in political tensions in South Africa? That is the question we pose to you. But first, let's take a look at all your headlines. Constitutional Court hearings into the powers of the Public Protector get underway in Johannesburg today. The city of Cape Town has granted permission to the hashtag Zuma Must Fall movement, amongst others, to protest in separate marches, just hours before President Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address on Thursday. And the search for 3 mine workers at the Lily mine in Barberton is entering a 5th day as hopes fade. Now, those are all your headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall what's happening in the sports stream. Good morning.
Good morning, Elvis, and hearty good morning to everybody at home as well. Coming up in sports is quite a lot about cricket, rugby, as well as about FIFA and football. But I get ahead of myself. This is what we've got for you in the sports just now. Under pressure, Proteas with a mountain to climb as they face a second successive series defeat to England.
So hopefully we can put it all together at once, and we've got to do it consecutively, 3 matches in a row.
Now, SARU has decided not to allow CEO Yuriru to lead the search on choosing South Africa's next rugby coach. And in an exclusive interview on SABC News, Tokyo Sehwale insists that he's still in the race for FIFA president and he's not concerned by CAF's decision not to back him. I'll have you know, I'll also be chatting to Mark Omar about exactly that a little later, about 10:20 or so. Be sure to stick around. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Kendall. He will be back later with more. Top story this hour. Constitutional Court hearings into the powers of the Public Protector get underway in Johannesburg today. The economic freedom fighters and the Democratic Alliance will argue that President Jacob Zuma must comply with the Public Protector's findings that he is obliged to repay a portion of the money spent on non-security features at his Nkandla home. Now, they have rejected the President's proposal to settle the matter after the Auditor General and the Finance Minister determine how much he owes. Johannesburg authorities have given the EFF permission for 8,000 people to march to the Constitutional Court today. Now, we'll keep you updated on that story as it unfolds because we're just waiting for the court to start, and we'll go there live in a short while. So stay tuned right here on Channel 404, your favorite channel, your favorite program, Newsroom. Chairperson of the Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association, Kebby Mfatswe, says that opposition parties have been using the Nkandla issue as a political tool and have nothing to offer South Africans. He says he's happy that President Jacob Zuma says he is prepared to pay a portion of the money spent on Nkandla.
The opposition parties, they've got nothing to offer to the people of South Africa. They've been using the Nkandla issue as their political tool. Now that the president has said he's prepared to pay the money, for a long time he has been saying that as long as the correct institution can tell him how much he should pay for those upgrades at Nkandla, it's not a new thing. Now the political opposition parties, they are now using this thing as a campaign. So we are happy that the president has taken this decision, and it will bring the issue of Nkandla to an end. And we know for a fact that after that, the political parties will not be having anything to campaign or to offer our people.
Now, the Constitutional Court hearings into the powers of the Public Protector get underway in Johannesburg now. As we speak, we go live.
I call the matter of economic freedom fighters and the Speaker of the National Assembly and others, and Democratic Alliance and the Speaker of the National Assembly and others for hearing.
Please, if you tell the court, my learned friends, Mr. Porter, Mr. Luca Toby, Mr. Mitchell, and I are here for the economic freedom fight.
Thank you, Mr. Trengove. Thank you, Mr. Kurtz.
Chief Justice and Justices of the Court, I'm here for the Speaker of the National Assembly, together with my very friend Mr. Nangisa and Mr. Sangiwa.
Thank you, Ms. Ngozi Thomas.
May it please the Court, Chief Justice, I appear with my learned friends Mr. Kemp, Mr. Duplessis, Ms. Mahabir, Ms. Butterton-Jones, for the President.
Thank you, Mr. Gondlet.
Chief Justice, Honorable Chief Justice, I appear for the Minister together with my learned seniors, Ms. Dingas and Ms. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Mukari.
Justice, members of the Court, my learned friend Mr. Stubbs and I appear for the Public Secretary and both.
Thank you too, Mr. Marcus.
Chief Justice, members of the Court, I'm here with my learned friend Mr. Kelly for Corruption Watch and for Security.
Thank you, Ms. Steinberg. Mr. Trengo. As I said, and maybe also as a reminder to my colleagues and I, because it's a fairly new development, all of you except Mr. Kurtz at his request will, depending on the time allocated to them, make submissions for an uninterrupted period of 10 minutes, and I think it's only one, Ms. Steinberg, who will have 5 minutes uninterrupted. You may proceed, Mr. Trengo.
Thank you, Chief Justice. I propose to address 6 topics. The first is the findings made by the Public Protector, because quite unexpectedly there is still some debate as to what she actually found. I will secondly address the status of her orders and will submit that they have the status of binding administrative orders. In the third place, address the conduct of the President, who defied the Public Protector, and we shall submit in violation of his duties under the Constitution. In the fourth place, the conduct of the National Assembly, who played along with the President and protected him in violation of its duty to call him to account under the Constitution. In the fifth place, I will submit that this matter falls within this Court's exclusive jurisdiction. And in the last place, in the alternative, if it does not, then we will submit that it would be appropriate for this Court, in the interest of justice, to allow the EFF direct access to this Court. May I start then with the findings of the Public Protector, because it appears that there is still debate about what it is that she actually found. And if I may ask you in this regard to go to the extract from her report in the EFF papers at page 116.
Mr. If you could just give us the paragraph number with the Chief Justice's permission.
The findings start at paragraph 10. The particular findings that I will refer to come later. It is the internal page 427 of the report where the findings start. The findings upon which I wish to lay emphasis firstly come at the internal page 429, paragraphs 10.3.1 and 10.3.2, where the Public Protector found that certain of the measures taken by the Department at the Nkandla residence were not required by the President's security requirements and were unlawful. And those measures are listed in paragraph 10.3.2. There are 8 of them in all, and I won't recite them. It's important, though, to make the point that there is a finding that those measures were both unnecessary and unlawful. The next finding comes at page 431 in paragraph 10.5.3, where the Public Protector held that the President and his family improperly benefited from certain of those measures, that's certain of the 9, and then she lists 5 of the 9 measures from which she said the President improperly benefited, and they are there listed. So there is, her report does not leave that matter open for debate. Then at internal page 437, paragraphs 10.9.1.4 and 10.9.1.5, she says in the first place that it's her view that the President tacitly accepted the implementation of all the measures and unduly benefited from the enormous capital investment from the non-security installations. And the next paragraph, it is also my considered view that the amount in question should be based on the cost of the installation of some or all of the items that can be conscionably accepted as security measures, that can't be conscionably accepted as security measures, and then she lists again the 5 items. This paragraph later translates into a particular order that she makes. If I may then go to page 439, where she deals in 3 paragraphs, 10.10.1.4, 5, and 6, with the President's conduct in violation of the ethics code prescribed under the Constitution, and concludes in paragraph 10.10.1.6 as follows. His failure to act in protection of state resources constitutes a violation of paragraph 2 of the Executive Ethics Code and accordingly amounts to conduct that is inconsistent with his office as member of the Cabinet as contemplated by section 96 of the Constitution. And then lastly, the orders she makes are at page 442 in paragraph 11.1. It says remedial action to be taken in terms of section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution is the following. The President is to, and then follows in 4 subparagraphs steps that the President is required to take. And we shall submit with respect that there's no doubt that the language used makes it clear that those are matters that the President must take. They weren't mere recommendations. So much for the actual findings. If I may turn then to the status of the orders she makes. In other words, the status of the 4 orders in paragraph 10.1. Now, I will deal briefly with this issue because it is one that some of my learned friends will deal with again and in greater depth. But we are concerned with the proper interpretation of section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution that provides that the Public Protector has the power to take appropriate remedial action. Our submission is that that power includes the power to make binding administrative orders. In this regard, we commend firstly the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal in the SABC case, and in particular, the Court deals with this issue in paragraphs 43 to 53, but we commend in particular its ratio in paragraphs 52 and 53 of its judgment, where it really makes the point, heart of the point is this, that the Constitution intends the Public Protector to take appropriate remedial action, which means intend the Public Protector to have the power herself to take appropriate remedial action, and for that action to be effective, because it can't be appropriate if not effective, and therefore that she has the power to issue binding orders. We submit with respect that, apart from the SCA judgment, that we also commend the heads of argument of Corruption Watch, which is devoted to this issue, and we, with respect, join in the submissions that they make. We submit that one of the most crucial features of this power is not only its language, but the shift of language from the interim constitution to the final constitution in the formulation of the public protector's powers. Under the interim constitution, she was given the power in section 112(1)(b, and I quote, to endeavour to resolve any dispute or rectify any act or omission. A very soft power of mediation and conciliation. That language was changed in the final constitution, quote, to take appropriate remedial action. And one has to take seriously that deliberate choice of language and the change of language, which can only mean, firstly, that she is given the power to take remedial action herself, not merely to recommend to other people to do so. And secondly, that the remedy she is entitled to employ must be an appropriate one. And this court has repeatedly held from Fosey on, in the Fosey line of cases, that appropriate relief means effective relief. We submit that the same goes for this power. You might think that that leaves her with unduly wide powers, but let me say that there are two very significant limitations on that power. The first is that the issue of an administrative order would constitute administrative action and therefore be subject to control under the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, which is a significant control both in the manner of decision-making and on the reasonableness of the decision, of the outcome itself. Secondly, the Section 182(1) prefaces this power, as it does with all her powers, to say that it may be regulated by national legislation. Now, the current Act predates the final constitution on this score. It was not amended to take account of this change in the constitutional powers conferred on the public protector. But it would remain open to Parliament to regulate the public protectors, the exercise of this power, in a very significant way. We know of all the jurisprudence that says that the power to regulate is a very wide power and it stops short only of total prohibition. But it is open to Parliament significantly to regulate the exercise of this power. So an objection that the outcome, the remedy, the interpretation for which we contend is unduly wide is with respect unfounded, because there are these two very significant sets of control over. May I turn then in the third place to the conduct of the President, because we submit that the President defied the public protector's orders and that his defiance constituted a violation of his duties under the Constitution. May I first deal with the facts before I turn to the constitutional implications of those facts? The conduct of the President, or the President's response to the Public Protector's report, starts with his report of the 2nd of April 2014. It is in the EFF papers at page 259. And I won't go there because it's an early response, but I note that at page 260, the President says two things. He says, firstly, describes the Public Protector's orders as recommendations, and secondly, says, I must now apply my mind to her recommendations and the report of the Ministerial Task Team. So he doesn't recognize that her orders enjoy any status beyond that of a recommendation, and he treats them as if they are no more and of no more significance than the recommendations of his own Ministerial Task Team. That was the President's first report. Then there was his second report of the 14th of August 2014. That is at page 52 of the EFF's papers. And again, the same thing. He says, firstly, at page 65, in paragraph 51, speaks of the public protector's proposals, and secondly, at page 70, in paragraph 63.2, says that he has decided that the Minister of Police must now decide whether he should repay anything, and if so, how much. So he doesn't recognize the binding nature of the Public Protector's report at all.
Mr. Trengove, are you rounding up because now it is that time?
Certainly, Chief Justice. There then follows correspondence between the Public Protector and the President. The Public Protector's letter is dated the 21st of August 2014. It should have been in the EFF papers, but it's for some reason not been included in them. It was referred to by the Speaker. But this letter may be found in the DA papers at page 524, where the Public Protector takes issue with the President because she insists that her report is binding on him and not a mere recommendation. The President responds to that letter on the 11th of September 2014, and his response is at page 293. And we emphasize again two features of that response. Firstly, in paragraph 8, he says that the Public Protector's report is not binding on him. Sorry, that's paragraph 3. Public Protector's report is not binding. And in paragraph 8, that the Minister of Police will decide whether he should repay anything, and if so, how much. Then after that comes the President's answer in the EFF application. In his main answer, at page 337, paragraph 48, he again takes the same position as he had done before. The Public Protector has the power to recommend, but may not make an order with any force of law. In other words, her orders do not have any force of law, they are mere recommendations. There was the President's main heads of argument in this case. At page 30, paragraphs 61 and 62, again, that same position. But then came a switch. The President filed a further set of heads in response to the heads of Corruption Watch. And it seems that Corruption Watch may have persuaded the President that he was wrong, because in these heads, he now accepts that the Public Protector does have the power to make binding orders. If I can just give you the references. And he does so in paragraphs 3, 7, and 8 of those heads of argument. But he persists only with one residual point. It's a point made in paragraphs 14 and 19.4. He says that whilst I accept that the Public Protector has the power to make binding orders, she didn't do so in this case. In other words, paragraph 11.1 of her report was a mere recommendation. And it's common cause that she has the power too to make recommendations. So on the legal issue, on the powers of the Public Protector, there is no difference left between the EFF and the President. The President now accepts that she may make binding orders. She may sometimes also make mere recommendations. The only remaining issue is whether in paragraph 11.1, those were mere recommendations or orders. Now, that is why I took you to paragraph 11.1 in the first place. The President is too. It's formulated in mandatory terms, and it cannot, with respect, be sensibly interpreted as a mere recommendation. It was an order made by the Public Protector, and on the law that is now common cause between us and the President, he was bound by it. We submit that his defiance of the public protector violated his duties under the Constitution.
Mr. Trengrove, sorry to interrupt. As I understood the papers, I may be wrong, is that the interpretation given by the President to the report was that the public protector did not make a final finding in relation to the non-security related aspects, and that because that was still open, he could take steps to investigate whether they are security related, and he was still in the process of doing so.
Indeed, Justice Ferdinand, and that's why I started with the rather incongruous exercise of going through those findings, because I submit with respect that she unambiguously finds that 8 measures were unlawful, the President, because they were not necessary for the President's security, that 5 of those 8 measures were measures from which the President improperly benefited the President, and therefore that their cost and should be determined because he is duty-bound to repay the state for their cost or a contribution of it. And you quite correctly articulate the President's position, but we submit with respect that it's an untenable position. Those paragraphs of the findings of the report are simply not open to the interpretation sought to be placed on them. But it is all that is left in that debate between the EFF and the President. He's now conceded that the public protector may make binding orders. And that, with respect, is a huge concession and a very important principle. That's really one of the main reasons why the EFF is here, is to establish once and for all that the public protector may make binding orders. She has explained to you how the effectiveness of her office has essentially collapsed since the President made the point in Parliament that her reports are mere recommendations. And that's why it's so important in this case, not only for the resolution of this dispute, but for the effectiveness of the office of the public protector, that an authoritative determination be made that she may make binding administrative orders. We submit that the President's defiance of the public protector violated his duties under the Constitution. Firstly, under Section 181, sub 3. That section requires of all organs of state to assist and protect the public protector, to ensure, amongst others, her dignity and effectiveness. Positive duties to assist and protect the public protector, to ensure her dignity and effectiveness. Now, we submit that there cannot be a more flagrant violation of that duty, positively to assist and protect, than to flagrantly defy and disobey. So there was a violation of that duty. We submit that there was also a violation of the President's ethical duties under Section 96, 2B and C of the Constitution. If I may just go to them. The section says the following. Speaks of the ethical duties of members of the Cabinet, and then 2 says, members of the Cabinet and deputy ministers may not b. act in any way that is inconsistent with their office or expose themselves to any situation involving the risk of a conflict between their official responsibilities and private interests, or c. use their position or any information entrusted to them to enrich themselves or improperly benefit any other person. The public protector has already held that the President, in accepting the benefit of the development at his home, acted in breach of this constitutional duty. But we submit too that not only was there a violation in that conduct, the President also violated this ethical duty in his defiance of the public protector, because he defied the public protector as President of the country in order to protect his ill-gotten gains. The public protector ordered him to make restoration to the state. He defied her to protect the wealth he had obtained in a manner held by the public protector to be unlawful, and in that way he used his position to enrich himself or improperly benefit other person. So we submit that not only his conduct at the time, but his response to the report constituted a violation of Section 96. And let me say that there are these two constitutional violations, but they are special in this sense, that all of us are bound by the Constitution and all of us have to obey the Constitution. But we submit that there is a singular and heightened duty on the President to do so. And the Constitution specifically makes that clear by two of its provisions. The first is Section 83B, which specifically says that the President must uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as the supreme law of the Republic. Uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution. He is our leader. It is his duty in the first place not only to obey, but to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution. The second provision is Section 87, which prescribes his oath of office on taking office, and the oath itself appears in Schedule 2, where the President is required.
Sorry, Mr. Trengrove, a colleague was drawing something to my attention. I didn't hear the last section that you referred
Section
to.
87. Section 87, which requires the oath. The oath itself is in Schedule 2, Item 1, in terms of which the President is required to swear or proclaim that, and I quote, "I will obey, observe, uphold, and maintain the Constitution and all other law of the Republic." So that the President's constitutional violations in this case were not simply akin to any other violation by any other citizen. These were violations by the President, despite the very important, heightened, and singular duty that he bears under the Constitution.
Oh, if I may interrupt, Mr. Trengrove, at paragraph 13 on page 18 of the EFF's founding affidavit, there was reliance on 83.6. Are you no longer now relying on 83.6? I hear you only mentioning Section 83B.
Justice Kampepe, let me make sure. Yes, we confine our submission to 83B and C.
It's just that when you were making a submission, you didn't make any submission with regard to 83C.
No, we submit with respect that his duty arises both under 83B and 83C. If I didn't mention it, I should have done so. Can I turn to the conduct of the National Assembly? The National Assembly, the facts appear from the Speaker's affidavit in the EFF application from page 156. But the aspects of it that I wish to emphasize is this. Firstly, from page 225, in paragraphs 141.2 and 141.3, the Speaker says the following. She said that in the National Assembly, the view of the majority party was 141.2, all the reports, that's in other words, not only the Public Protector's report, but also the report of the task team, all the reports should be considered and treated equally in order to avoid casting aspersions on any of the government agencies or structures that dealt with the security upgrades at the President's private residence. The Public Protector makes recommendations and may propose remedial actions, which remedial actions are not binding and enforceable on the organs of state. And it was that position, same position as that of the President, that informed the National Assembly's handling of the matter from then on, because you will see that they consistently acted in accordance with this perception. At page 234, you'll see that she deals in two very long paragraphs, 154 and 155, with the findings of an ad hoc committee appointed by the National Assembly. And what the ad hoc committee really did, and this discussion runs up to page 246, is to reconsider all of the findings of the Public Protector. In other words, the ad hoc committee arrogated to itself the freedom to sit in judgment on the Public Protector, and failed to recognize that the Public Protector's order was binding and that their business, properly so called, was to consider how to give effect to those findings and not merely to second-guess them, to go behind and sit in judgment on them. And there's then a long description of how the ad hoc committee overturned all of the findings of the Public Protector. And that culminates at page 246 in paragraph 156 in the adoption by the National Assembly of those recommendations of the ad hoc committee. In other words, this overruling of the Public Protector now was endorsed by the National Assembly. At page 247.
Mr. Trengrove, as you deal with it, was this a question of interpretation? In other words, was this based on lack of understanding of exactly what the remedial powers of the Public Protector entailed, or was it a deliberate defiance of a known interpretation of or meaning and extent of the powers of the Public Protector?
Chief Justice,
in other words, is there room for saying, I didn't know. Now that Mr. Trengrove has explained, now that the SCA has explained, I know? Or was it just an out-and-out defiance of the known position?
Let me say that one has one's suspicions about it. And the view of the law apparently depended on the party to which you belong. But I will argue the matter on the assumption that it was a bona fide error of law. In other words, that the members of the National Assembly, or those who supported this position, genuinely believed that the Public Protector's report was a mere recommendation, and it was up to them to determine whether to accept the recommendation or not. I will argue the case on that assumption. But what it still means is that they were desperately wrong in law, and as a result of that error of law, didn't do their constitutional duty. I will get to their constitutional duty shortly. So I accept, Chief Justice, it's an important issue. The facts aren't clear, but I'm prepared to argue the matter on the assumption that it was a good faith error of law. Upshot of the error.
Mr. Trengrove.
Justice Zondo.
This might take you a little back to the time when you were dealing with the binding nature of remedial action, but it may be connected with the role of the National Assembly. Now, two questions. One is, as I read the Constitution, it appears that the remedial action must be taken by the Public Protector. And if I am correct in that regard, I wonder whether if one looks at paragraph 11.1.1 of the report, where the president is ordered, so to speak, to take steps, whether that would fall within the ambit of take appropriate remedial action. Now, the one scenario which appears to me to commend itself as falling within, as probably falling within take appropriate remedial action, subject to what you may say and what other counsel may say, is where maybe the public protector were to institute action to recover public monies that have been wasted from somebody. It appears to me that that would be taking remedial action, and it would be, the remedial action would be taken by the public protector herself. But I would like your submissions on whether, where she orders somebody else to say take certain steps, that would fall within her taking remedial action. That's the one question. The second question is this. Section 13 of the Public Protector Act says the provisions of this act shall not affect any investigation under or the performance or exercise of any duty or power imposed or conferred by or under any law. It seems to me that what it says is, for example, that if, let us say, a minister is required to take certain action by the public protector, and in terms of some law, the minister is supposed to do some homework or some investigation before taking such action, the minister would be, doesn't affect the minister's obligation or duty to first undertake or perform that duty. Let us say, for example, the public protector were to say the minister must take disciplinary action against an official. The minister may be under an obligation in terms of the labor laws to give a hearing to that official first. And the minister would be required to approach the representations of that official with an open mind and without an attitude that says, I've been ordered by the public protector, so I will do what she says. So whether, when one has regard then to Section 13 of the Public Protector Act, whether it can be said that all the time when the public protector takes remedial action, it's binding in the sense that the person against whom it is taken has no choice. Thank you.
Justice Zondo, may I start with the second question because it's easier than the first? I submit that as far as the second question is concerned, yes, certainly, the public protector may not order anybody to do anything unlawful. And what's more, the public protector is obliged under PAJA to hear the defendant before she makes any order. So that would be the occasion for the minister to say, you can't make such and such an order against me because there are these requirements that I first have to fulfill before I can make such an order. And if the public protector nonetheless makes an order which requires the minister to act unlawfully, that would be a ground for review. So certainly I accept your proposition that the public protector can't order anybody to do anything that is unlawful. But there are remedies, firstly to avoid it, and secondly to cure it if she were to do so. If I may come back to the first question, and that is, what does it mean to say, take appropriate remedial steps? Submit with respect simply to sue is not to take appropriate remedial steps, because if there is a cause of action, that claim would have been there all along. The victim would have been entitled to sue anyway. The public protector would not add any value except perhaps the value that the Legal Aid Board adds. But to take appropriate remedial action is not the same as asking the court to take appropriate remedial action. It is to take it yourself. In other words, administratively to put right the injustice if one is found. And with respect, I can't make it more concrete than that, but perhaps just to refer you to what the SCA said in the Mail and Guardian case about the essence of the function of the public protector. That's the Public Protector v. Mail and Guardian, 2011, Volume 4, SA, page 420, at paragraph 6. The Office of the Public Protector is an important institution. It provides what will often be a last defense against bureaucratic oppression and against corruption and malfeasance in public office that are capable of insidiously destroying the nation. If that institution falters or finds itself undermined, the nation loses an indispensable constitutional guarantee. And we can just submit, as the SCA did in the SABC case, that that role can only be fulfilled by an effective public protector. And a public protector who has no original power at all, but merely to help victims to sue with respect will not be effective. So we submit with respect that the power includes the power to make recommendations on occasion, but where appropriate, to make binding administrative orders. If I may just...
Mr. Trengove, if I could just follow up my colleague Zondo's question. Have you dealt with the possibility that Section 13 of the Public Protector Act permits ministers to carry on their lawful functions within the remit of their executive position, notwithstanding the Public Protector's remedial action?
Yes, no, I accept that is so. And I don't... It is a component we submit of our submission, that the public protector is not allowed, doesn't have the power to order anybody to do anything unprocedural or unlawful. So that we would certainly not suggest that she becomes, that she's above the law and can make orders which in any way contradict the law.
Mr. Trentgrove, on a follow-up of the questions that my brothers have asked, if the powers of the public protectors, which are to take appropriate remedial action, are binding, I am contrasting that to Section 165 of the Constitution, which states that an order or decision issued by a court binds all persons to whom and organs of state to which it applies. Now, if the drafters of the Constitution wanted to make her orders binding, why was the language akin to Section 165 not used?
Justice Kampepe, we submit that there is a big difference between the administrative order of the public protector and the judicial determination of a court, in other words, the order of a court. The difference is this, that the administrative order, like all other administrative orders of ICASA or of whatever the regulator might be, administrative orders are just that. They are binding but subject to review by the courts. So that we would submit that the public protector's orders are administrative orders, binding on those to whom they apply, but subject to review by the courts. A judgment of a court, however, a judicial determination, is final and binding on all, and not subject to review by the courts. Well, of course, once the appeal mechanism is exhausted. But there is a fundamental difference between the two, in the sense that the public protector acts as the complaints office of the state. and she is given the power within the state hierarchy to put right injustice. And those orders of her putting right, i.e. remedying the injustice, are binding at an administrative level. They are binding administrative orders. But we won't suggest that they have the same status at all as judgments of a court. Can I just emphasize one feature of these powers? Firstly, if it's a mere power of recommendation or mere power to litigate on behalf of somebody else, we submit that it loses its effectiveness, and you would then pay lip service to the constitutional demand that she must be able to take appropriate remedial steps. In other words, effective remedial steps. The other is the point I've already made. Bear in mind, if you think that these powers are unduly wide, that it's open to Parliament to regulate them, and secondly, that they are in any event subject to prior control.
Do you accept, sorry, this side, Mr. Chairman, do you accept that after the remedial action is ordered by the public protector, the National Assembly and the President would be entitled to say, well, we don't dispute these findings, but we want to investigate whether there are aspects of it that are unlawful, yes. and we want to investigate that and take steps.
Yes, indeed. And under this court's jurisprudence culminating in Curlin, if they conclude that the administrative decision is unlawful, the remedy is to review it and set it aside. You can't just defy it. You have to review it and set it aside. But as with any other, with a decision of the MEC to allow a hospital to be built, has the same status as that of the public protector who orders the president to repay the money. Both are binding, but subject to review. May I come back just to conclude on the conduct of the National Assembly. The National Assembly, I lastly wish to emphasize page 247, paragraphs 157 to 172, in which the National Assembly adopted the report of the Minister of Police in contradistinction to the Public Protector's report, to the effect that the President didn't need to give effect to the Public Protector's orders at all. Now, on this score, we submit that the National Assembly violated its constitutional obligations in the following respects. There is firstly its obligation to hold the President and his Cabinet to account, in this case, to hold the President to account. That's section 55(2), which provides the National Assembly must provide for mechanisms to ensure that all executive organs of state and the national sphere of government are accountable to it and maintain oversight of the exercise of national executive authority, including implementation of legislation, etc. And then there's 92(2), which is the other side of the coin, which says that members of Cabinet, which includes the President, are accountable collectively and individually to Parliament for the exercise of the powers and performance of their functions. Now, oh, and by the way, that accountability ultimately may culminate in section 89(1), which allows the National Assembly to remove the President from office. Now, in the event, what the Assembly did was not to call the President to account. I accept him for the moment that they were...
Can you just help me before you go any further? 89(1), how does it come in?
No, it's simply...
Is it mentioned by the way, or does it feature?
No, no. All I'm saying is that there are 3 sections that deal with the National Assembly's powers to hold the President to account. Their duty under 55(2), the President's duty under 92(2), and ultimately the National Assembly's ultimate tool is to relieve the President. I'm not suggesting that they should have employed that power in this instance. But
I'm sorry, Mr. Trango. Can I just clarify one thing on that score? We have had submissions to the effect that the President has violated the Constitution. Now, I'm wondering, why do you shy away from what Section 89(1) says in relation to a serious violation of the Constitution by the President, and saying that in the context of the fact that it is only the National Assembly that can act on the basis of that ground against the President?
Justice Jafta, may I say, I didn't think that this case needed any stirring. And certainly the National Assembly has a particular duty to call the President to account in this case. Firstly, because it's the only institution that can call him to account. Nobody else can. Everybody else in the executive can be called to account by the President or his cabinet. But the President can only be called to account by the National Assembly. So it's a very important tool. And the National Assembly has the ultimate power of dismissal. It failed in its failure, it violated the Constitution in its failure to call him to account at all. And it's enough for us to demonstrate that it failed in that constitutional duty. It is unnecessary for us to go further to seek to persuade you that they should not only have called him to account, but should have relieved him from office. I'm not making that submission.
Now, what do we have to make of the submission that the President has violated the Constitution in this context?
Well, let me say, I have to ultimately persuade you that you have exclusive jurisdiction in this matter, or persuade you to allow the case to come here on direct access. For that purpose, it is important for me to demonstrate that both the President and the National Assembly failed to discharge constitutional obligations of the kind that renders this case subject to the court's exclusive jurisdiction. But as far as the merits of the case are concerned, the principles, apart from the resolution of this issue, which my learned friend will tell you is easy, the President will now pay back some of the money. But the principles at stake are the public protector may make binding orders. The President and the National Assembly acted in breach of the Constitution by defying those orders. Those are the principles which we submit are at the heart of this case.
Mr. Trengove, if we can make the finding that, or holding that the EFF is pushing for on this aspect, I would imagine that we should also be able to even make a mandamus as well.
Sorry, Micah?
A mandamus in instances where we say you ought to have acted in this manner, you have not done so, therefore we direct you to do so. You should immediately see then that separation of powers issues in here, in this scenario. Now I'm interested to know under what circumstances would it lie with us to make such a mandamus? Under what because one can well conceive of situations where something that warrants the National Assembly calling upon a member of the executive to account, but the National Assembly not doing anything about that. Does it lie with us in every such instance to direct, when we are called upon to do so, that the executive must, rather the National Assembly must call upon the executive to account? Doesn't that raise separation of powers issues?
Justice Madlanga, it certainly raises separation of powers issues. It raises very sensitive separation of powers issues. It raises highly contentious political issues. And certainly if we didn't, the EFF didn't try to explore the full breadth of the remedies to which it might be entitled. And there is certainly an argument to be made for the proposition that the violation of by the National Assembly to perform their duty to hold the President to account justifies a remedy. The minimum remedy would be a declarator, but as you say, it might even be a mandamus. But the EFF did not push the outer boundaries of the remedies to which it might be entitled. You will have seen from its prayers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the order that it proposed, that it would suffice if the court were to hold that the public protectors may make binding orders, that these orders were binding on the President, and that the President acted in violation of the Constitution by defying those orders. That they might be entitled to further relief against the National Assembly might be so, but they've not sought for it.
You see, the reason I'm raising the issue is that the EFF may well not have pushed the boundaries, but when you make an order as a court, you must also be forward-looking and see what its likely implications are going to be in future. So that is why I'm asking, are we able to get an idea of what sort of scenarios or in what sort of circumstances would we be entitled either to make a mandamus or even a declarator?
That would be so certainly if the court was persuaded that the National Assembly did not act in error, but in defiance. If that were so, then it would certainly have justified specific mandatory relief against the National Assembly. We don't make that case. We hope and trust that once they are told that the President has to obey the public protector and that it has a duty to call him to account, that it will do its duty without being forced to do so by the judiciary.
Mr. Trentgrove, would I be correct in understanding your submissions to say that the National Assembly was lackadaisical in its approach to the Public Protector's report?
Yes. I submit that what the National Assembly should have done was to say to the President, Mr. President, we have a report from the Public Protector. You are bound to obey the report, to implement it. Explain to us why you haven't done so, or explain to us how you will do so. Instead, they adopted his approach. This is a mere recommendation, it's not binding, and they adopted overturned all of the findings of the Public Protector and adopted the Minister of Police's report instead. That's not holding to account, that's whitewashing. So and I accept, they may have been motivated by an error of law, but even if that were so, even if one accepts good faith, then what they did was not to hold to account, as they are obliged to do. They say, but we have mechanisms in place. Well, I know that the section speaks of mechanism, but the substantive duty imposed on National Assembly is to hold the executive to account, not merely to have a talk shop in which the executive can be protected in their defiance of the Public Protector. But there's a second duty.
No, before you go there, let me just make sure I understand. Was it open to the National Assembly, or was it not open to it? Upon receipt of the Public Protector's report and the report from the President, the reports from the President, to look deeper into the issues with a view to satisfying itself about the correctness of certain facts, and thereafter arrive at a position that is not necessarily designed to second guess the remedial action taken by the Public Protector?
Chief Justice, with respect, no. The National Assembly, properly advised, should have said to itself, we are bound by, or the President is bound by the Public Protector's findings and orders. And our job is to hold the President to account. So our function is to hold him to account, in other words, to call him to account for the implementation of the Public Protector's orders. That is what they should have done. And whether for good reason or bad, they failed to do so.
And was it open to the President then, before we get to the National Assembly, as part of the report to be submitted to the National Assembly, to look into the issue so that as part of his report, he can share some perspectives with the National Assembly, and the National Assembly would then have both his report and that of the Public Protector for the purpose of holding the President accountable?
Chief Justice, yes, but the legitimate question for debate was how to give effect to the Public Protector's report. That would have been a legitimate area for debate. It was not a legitimate area for debate to second guess, to sit in judgment on the Public Protector. Was she right? Are her factual findings correct? What do I think of her her orders? Should I implement them on? Those were illegitimate debates because the President was bound by the report. If the President challenged the report, then his remedy was to take it to court. Then
Yes.
Curlin kicks in.
I was about to get to that point, that if it was open to the President to look into these issues, just to satisfy himself that which the Public Protector has found is well-grounded, and he arrives at a conclusion that now there's a problem here. As I understand your submission, the only avenue open to him would have been to approach a court of law.
Review and not defiance. That is the answer. That's Curlin. That's Curlin.
Tranquil. As a follow-up to the question by my brother Froneman in relation to the investigation by Parliament and the President, you'll recall that in his recommendation, the terms of reference to the Minister in paragraph 63.2, the President seems to sanction a further parallel process by the Minister. And he seemed to go even wider than the remedial action in paragraph 11.1.1 of the Public Protector. What do we make of that?
No, that's completely unlawful. He was not allowed to second guess or sit in judgment of the Public Protector, and he's not allowed to mandate the Minister of Police to sit in judgment of the Public Protector. Their job was, their constitutional duty was to obey the Public Protector or to take her to court. So that, Justice Nkambine, thanks for making that point, but it was yet a further egregious extension of the defiance that the Minister of Police was mandated to sit in judgment of the Public Protector.
So if there's a flaw that lies in that sanctioning by the President in relation to what the Minister ought to have done, doesn't anything that flows from that, those terms of reference fall away?
Oh, absolutely. That report was an unlawful piece of defiance of the Public Protector, and its findings have no standing in law at all. So there can be absolutely no status in law of that unlawful attempt to circumvent and defy the Public Protector.
I beg your pardon. So if that is correct, if you find that to be correct, it means the Public Protector's findings remain because they were not subject to review. It means the Minister of Police report has no significance whatsoever.
No, we can
and
just ignore it.
And then we have to consider the appropriate relief.
Indeed, indeed. And the Public Protector's orders, findings and orders, they are binding in law. They must be obeyed, not second-guessed, overturned, circumvented. And the attempt to circumvent them is just an unlawful attempt. We can ignore it.
For my own peace of mind, I know my sister wants to put a question to you, but I just want to make sure I understand this. It becomes defiance if the President knew for sure what the correct position was, the correct position as articulated by you and the SCA, what the correct position was in relation to the remedial powers of the Public Protector. But if he didn't know, it can't be defiance, isn't it? It's just an error.
Well, if defiance implies willful disobedience, then I suppose that's so. And again, we must allow for the possibility that the President might have thought that that was the law. The evolution of his thinking suggests otherwise. But again, our case is not founded on proof of bad faith. So I'm not asking you to make a finding of bad faith. Our case is one of a failure to obey the Constitution, and that would be so regardless of whether he acted in bad faith or in ignorance of the law.
What would you then make of his mandate to the Minister of Police if he genuinely believed that the Public Protector's remedial powers amounted to, or the remedial action rather taken by the Public Protector amounts to recommendations? Would you say it was defiance? Would you say it was something else?
It remains. Let me leave the word defiance then, if it implies willful disobedience. But it remains unlawful. He didn't do what the Constitution required him to do, whether in good faith or bad. But for our case, that is enough. He violated the Constitution.
Paragraph 11.1.4 of the remedial action says the President to report to the National Assembly on his comments and actions on this report.
Yes.
Which actions was he supposed to take? I suppose the comments would be on the report, whether or not there's anything that is...
I understood that a report on his implementation of the Public Protector's orders, in other words, on the quantification of the money that he has to pay back and on the repayment of that money. I submit with respect that that is what it means in context. The following things, he must do the following things and then report to the National Assembly. That would be report on his implementation of these measures, not report on something else.
And the instruction to the Minister of Police would be ultra vires.
Absolutely unlawful. Chief Justice, I know that you would want to know
If I may just be permitted,
yes.
Mr. Trengrove.
That should be the last question you entertain.
To understand, thank you, CJ. Thank you, CJ. If I may just be permitted to understand your submission, you do not submit that the National Assembly used their processes to avoid the Public Protector's report. Your submission is that they used the processes in error and in good faith.
Well, I don't know good faith or bad, but I'm not arguing for a finding of bad faith. I accept that the cause of action upon which we rely does not depend on a finding of bad faith.
Yes.
But what the Constitution required of them in the first place, and I'm still just dealing with the first thing, in the first place, is to call the President to account for his implementation of the Public Protector's report.
Yes.
And it didn't do that.
Yes.
That was in breach of its constitutional duty.
And if one has regard to the fact that they established an ad hoc committee from the 19th of August, and still by the end of July 2015, nothing had really been concrete. Nothing concrete.
And what did that committee do? What did that committee do? The committee sat in judgment on the Public Protector. Was she right or was she wrong? They decided that she was wrong. And that's why they subcontracted the job to the Minister of Police. All of that is unlawful. They didn't do what they had to do, and that is to call the President to account for the implementation of paragraph 11.1 of the Public Protector's report. That was what they had to do. Let me say I've made that case under section 55.2. Let me say that the same violation occurred under section 181.3, because the National Assembly was obliged not only to hold the President to account, but under 81.3, like all other organs of state, was obliged to assist and protect the Public Protector. Now, it did the opposite. It didn't assist and protect the Public Protector to ensure her dignity and effectiveness. It participated in the President's undermining of the Public Protector's report and his failure to implement it. So, and I've said that the National Assembly has a particular duty to call the President to account. Firstly, Justice Jafta, because They are the only institution that call the President to account. But secondly, it is also an institutional role envisaged by the Public Protector Act itself. Section 82B of the Act says that, I may just find it. B says the Public Protector shall, at any time, submit a report to the National Assembly on the findings of a particular investigation if, and there are 7 circumstances. Number 2 reads, he or she deems it in the public interest, and 3 reads, it requires the urgent attention of or intervention by the National Assembly. So it is one of the avenues, one of the remedies given to the Public Protector to ask the National Assembly to intervene, to call the President to account, to ensure that he fulfills his obligation under the orders that she made. I have two, Chief Justice, my learned friend, Mr. Katz, has said that I may have 10 minutes of his hour if I have to.
You've had 7 minutes of that 10 minutes already.
May I then be very brief, because I have to address you on jurisdiction. I'm not sure whether any of our learned friends still persist in their objection to it. But I submit in the first place that this case falls within the court's exclusive jurisdiction, and on that score relies on the jurisprudence of this court in 3 cases: Doctors for Life, paragraphs 19 to 27, Von Arbo, paragraphs 33 to 37, and Women's Legal Center, paragraphs 11 to 17. And we submit that this matter, the constitutional violations of which the President and the National Assembly stand accused, do fall within the narrow band of violation of constitutional obligations that trigger this court's exclusive jurisdiction, because they raise important questions. Those questions are of intense political contention, and they are questions to which there is no obvious answer. You remember the court, for instance, said the kind of duty which requires the organ of state, Parliament in this case, to determine how to discharge the duty rather than where the answer is obvious. In this case, how does the National Assembly call the President to account? What does it have to do to call the President to account? It's one of those ambiguous duties which this court has said constitutes a constitutional obligation which, if it is alleged to have been violated, triggers the exclusive jurisdiction. And we submit that this court's ratio in Doctors for Life is on all fours with this case. Doctors for Life, paragraphs 24, 25, and 26. But let me deal with one further requirement elaborated upon in Women's Legal Center, paragraphs 16 to 20, and that's the so-called agent specificity question. The court suggested that the kind of constitutional violations that would trigger this court's exclusive jurisdiction are only those constitutional obligations which are imposed on Parliament or the President and alone. But the court didn't hold that to be so. It merely said it was a pointer and a suggestion. And in the context, one should see it in the context of that case, because in that case the violation was a violation by the state of Section 7.2. And the point made by the court is that that is not the kind of constitutional duty where the violation by the President is a violation as a member of a collective and not individually. We submit that in this case, firstly, the duty violated by the National Assembly complies with the agent specificity requirement. That's a duty imposed only on the National Assembly. And once that breach brings the case within the exclusive jurisdiction of this court, it brings the whole case within the jurisdiction of this court. Secondly, the President's duties violated in this case are duties not imposed on the President alone, but on the Cabinet. And we submit, for instance, an allegation that the President, in violation of Section 96, unlawfully enriched himself at the expense of the state, would be quintessentially the kind of question that belongs in the exclusive jurisdiction of this court. And we submit that the mere fact that that duty might not be peculiar to the President, but might extend to all the members of Cabinet, if the violation, in other words, if the alleged perpetrator is the President personally, as opposed to a collective, then that also qualifies for exclusive jurisdiction. We submit...
Mr. Trengov, if I may just interpose in relation to the agent-specific test in Women's Legal Resource Center. Section 83C, if you can help me there. What does that duty entail? I'm aware that the applicant relies on Albert in relation to the duty under Section 83C.
Yes.
Would you please just elaborate on that?
Well, we submit that what that section does is to say that while all of us are bound by the Constitution, there is a heightened and singular duty on the President to uphold the Constitution. And we would couple that with the oath of office to say, yes, it is true that we accuse the President of constitutional obligations, but they are singular violations because there is a singular duty on the President a singular and heightened duty on the President to uphold the Constitution.
I don't understand. I mean, how does national unity come into the picture in relation to what happened here?
No.
Which aspect of 83C finds expression here?
Well,
I must confess I've battled quite a bit with the application of this section.
The emphasis should be on B, must uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as the supreme law. And in C, we submit that it's only the last part, conduct which will advance the Republic. In other words, in the public interest. But we don't suggest that in this case the national unity is of any...
Conduct that will?
No, we don't suggest that the first part...
No, the second part you say, how does it find application?
Well, it must be read together with B. B says uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as the supreme law of the Republic. And C says that he must also promote that which will advance the Republic. That means he must act in the public interest, we submit. But we're not suggesting that if we don't make a case under B that we will be saved by...
I understand B.
Yeah.
I understand B. I don't understand C.
C is a footnote to B as far as our case is concerned. Chief Justice...
But Mr. Trengrove, I have difficulty myself with regard to your reliance on 83 to indicate that the EFF has established exclusive jurisdiction. If one has regard to what you yourself has relied upon, being our decision in Women's Legal Trust.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you are now submitting that you may not necessarily be relying much on 83C, but you may definitely be placing reliance on 83B.
Justice Kampepe, let me say in the first place, our main argument on exclusive jurisdiction is that the National Assembly breached its duty under Section 55 and that that meets the agent-specific test.
Yes.
As far as the President is concerned, we must confess that the duties violated by the President are not duties imposed on him alone. They are duties that he shares with the Cabinet and some other duties that he shares with all organs of state, for instance, under Section 181. But we say this, that the President's duty to uphold the Constitution is not just the same duty imposed on every other citizen to uphold the Constitution. And that is where Section 83 B and C comes in, and that is where the oath of office comes in. What is singular and unique about the President is that the Constitution imposes on him a singular and heightened duty to uphold the Constitution. But we can't take it further than that. We submit, our first case is that the National Assembly's duty is a unique duty, and if it qualifies us for exclusive jurisdiction, then the whole case qualifies for exclusive jurisdiction. The alternative argument is one for
Pardon, Mr. Beg your pardon, let me just interpose. If we are minded to accept your argument in relation to 83 B and C, even though B was not pleaded, and we read that in conjunction with 167(6) of the Constitution, which is mentioned only in the notice of motion, but appears nowhere in the pleadings. What should you do there? Because the problem is that the applicant relies on 167(6) in the notice of motion, but does not take the point further in the pleadings.
No, with respect, we do submit in the alternative. We ask for direct access under 167(6). And let me say this about direct access. This court's approach to direct access, we submit, is best set out in two cases. There's firstly Bruce and Vliesetex, which has been repeatedly affirmed, and that's 1998, Volume 2, SA 1143, paragraphs 8 and 9. But then secondly, also Mazibuku v. Sisulu, 2013, Volume 6, SA 249 CC, and that is paragraphs 34 to 35, and in the minority judgment, but which accurately surveys the law on this issue, in paragraphs 127 to 129. And what they say is this, is that only in exceptional cases will the court allow direct access. Now let me just say this about it. This is a matter of high constitutional and public importance. It's a matter of high political contention. Parliament is in disarray from time to time, and there is great disturbance and unhappiness about the failure to resolve this issue. Despite the SCA judgment, it is clear that this matter has not been finally put to bed. In contradistinction to other cases that have come here, the heart of this case, i.e. the status of the public protector's findings, has been before the High Court and before the SCA. So it is not as if the issue has not yet been ventilated in the lower courts. And the parties in this case agree that speedy resolution of this matter is important, and we refer in that regard to two statements on this score. Firstly, the State Attorney's letter, the one that was distributed a few days ago, the letter of 2 February 2016, paragraph 3, says, and I quote, "The need for finality is apparent." And then there's also the Public Protector's answer, page 387, paragraphs 17.1 and 17.2, where she makes it quite clear how the effectiveness of her office has been destroyed by this perception that her orders are mere recommendations. And on that score, in the final instance, let me also say this. The test for exclusive jurisdiction is a very obscure and complicated test, not easy to apply, and obscure at the edges. There is no bright line that tells one whether you're in or out. We submit with respect that in a case where there is an arguable case for exclusive jurisdiction, if the court should find that the litigant missed the exclusive jurisdiction requirement, but in a case in which that was arguable, it should be generous in granting direct access, because it would create an unjust system if the litigant was faced with a hard choice of choosing a court under a definition of which the edges are vague. Because if you go to the High Court, you might be non-suited there and told you should have been in the Constitutional Court. And if you come here, you might conversely be told you should have been in the High Court. That injustice of applying a vague test to the prejudice of litigants who find out at the end of the day they're in the wrong court could be ameliorated if this court, in arguable cases, is a little more generous in granting direct access, even where it should find that the case for exclusive jurisdiction was arguable but not satisfied. We ask, Chief Justice, we would ask for an order in terms of our prayers 1 to 4, but in the light of the recent evolution of the President's position on the issue, we submit that those prayers can best be given effect to in the manner suggested in the draft order that we circulated a few days ago. So we formally still ask for an order in terms of our prayers 1 to 4, but we couple that with a suggestion that in the light of the evolution of this case, the best way of doing it is in accordance with the order that we proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Trengove. And for the benefit of those who are to follow, our undertaking to sit until 7 p.m. stands. It's not a threat. It's the desire to get this matter over and done with. So the ball is in your court just as it is in ours. Mr. Katz.
Chief Justice, thank you. Chief Justice, I had indicated that I would welcome intervention from the justices at the outset. And perhaps in light of that offer from myself, what I intend to do in the beginning is deal with some of the questions that have been posed by members of the court to my learned friend, Mr. Trengove. And then I will
maybe before you do, is there any ground that has not been covered that you would want to traverse?
Yes, there's certain facts.
You could just highlight that so that we know what is it that you consider.
I will do so, Chief Justice. Thank you.
Necessary to still deal with.
The broad outline of my address will be: I deal with the legal position regarding the public protector's powers.
Come again, Mr. Katz. I didn't hear that.
I'll deal with the legal position regarding the public protector's powers. That'll be the first topic.
We're not leaving that for Mr. Marcus.
I'll explain why I'd like to spend a few minutes on it. Perhaps, Chief Justice, seeing that you asked me that directly, let me deal with that up front. And I deal with that in response to Justice Kempepe's question to Mr. Trengove about the question as to why the word binding appears in Section 165 but not in the relevant Section 182 of the Constitution. And the answer is this, from the DA's perspective. And it's contained in paragraph 44 of our heads. The remedial action has legal effect and must be complied with unless and until it is set aside on review. The SCA, and I'll take the court to it, does not ever use the word binding, but on the contrary, it accepts the DA's argument in this court, in the High Court, in the SABC matter, and in that court on that very issue. And that the court will see in paragraph 45 of the SCA's judgment, where it deals with the various considerations that the High Court in that matter considered. And then 6 lines down in paragraph 45, it said, but a court is an inaccurate comparator, and the phrase binding and enforceable is terminologically inapt, and in this context conduces to confusion. For it is well settled in our law that until a decision is set aside by a court in proceedings for judicial review, it exists in fact, and there's legal consequences that cannot simply be overlooked, and there's reference to eau de Kraan.
So it's a Curlin principle.
The Curlin principle. So we would submit that as we submitted the DA, as it's submitted in the SABC case, and as we've submitted in our heads of argument, the word binding is not one that needs to creep in to the debate on the legal effect of the public protector's powers. The real issue is her remedial action enforceable until one less set aside on review? And we argue, yes, it has legal effect, and that party or those parties, an organ of state subject to that remedial action, has a duty to comply with the remedial action unless and until it's set aside on review. So that's the first proposition that I'd like to deal with as far as Justice Kampepe's question to Mr. Trengrove. And the court will not see the word binding in the SCA judgment. I just want to touch upon the various other aspects of the SCA's judgment on the powers, because we and I include myself, have travelled a long road from that first day before Justice Skipper's 2 years ago, or 18 months ago. In paragraph 47 of the SCA's judgment, there is a statement which we submit will encourage this court to adopt a stance that Mr. Trengrove did not push for, and that is that on the facts of this case, there was defiance.
I missed out the last word.
There was defiance by the state respondents. That's the President, the National Assembly, and the Minister of Police. And I want to just touch upon this because it's not unimportant as we develop our argument. In paragraph 47, the SCA says here, that's in the SABC case, there is no suggestion that the public protector exceeded her powers or that she acted corruptly. Now, in this case, we have not found any suggestion by the government respondents that the public protector has exceeded her powers or that she acted corruptly. And to that, may I turn to paragraph or page 349 of the Public Protector's report. It's in the DA papers on page 223, where there is a suggestion from the President that she acted at a point procedurally unfairly. And it's not unimportant, the process that the Public Protector adopted in investigating the Nkandla saga. And it's set out in detail in her report. One of the features, which I will come to, which is a case is made out on these papers by the DA, that there was obstructionism or there was obstruction and defiance of the worst kind, not at the moment her remedial action was taken, but from the beginning, when she started investigating. And that will, we would submit, influence the court as to how it deals with this question of defiance. But the point I wish to highlight is this. On page 349 of her report, she says, in summary, in respect of the President's response to her provisional report, the President said, "It is tainted by a lack of proper procedure. She," this is what the President says, "has not applied the rules of natural justice. It suffers from a lack of integrity, and that this has been compromised by persistent leaks and public pronouncements, and it would seem that she has adopted the incorrect legal framework in assessing the implementation of the security upgrades." She deals with it as an answer in the next paragraph. She says, "As I've already indicated, all the affected and interested parties were afforded a full opportunity to engage me on the evidence and information obtained during the investigation that appeared to implicate them. I've considered every comment and submission, including that of the President, for the purpose of this final report, and made changes and corrections where applicable to my provisional views, conclusions, and findings. I have also alluded in detail to compliance with the relevant legislation and legal processes after having considered the submissions made in this regard by the different parties, including the President. The point is this. When she took her remedial action, if the President was of the view, as he seems to have been, that there seemed to be a lack of proper procedure or that the rules of natural justice were not complied with, what is any person in this country who is faced with what they perceive to be that process, that illegal process, what are their rights? Judicial review. And that's irrelevant as to whether the remedial action is binding, is enforceable, is current, is anything else. That would have been what we would have called the appropriate bona fide response, if that was genuinely the views of the President.
Mr. Katz, sorry to interrupt. What difference does it make to your case and the relief you seek, whether it was done in good or bad faith?
Justice Froneman, I had intended to turn to that as my last topic when I deal with the appropriate order. But what we would suggest...
But I understood you to give us permission to interrupt right from the start.
I welcome. The answer is this. If one has regard to the actual relief that we seek, which is contained in Volume 1, it's paragraphs 1.1, 1.2, 2, 3, and 4. We would submit, like Mr. Trengrove, that it's not necessary for this court to come to a conclusion that there was willful disobedience and defiance in order to grant the DA the praise that it seeks. However, the DA is of the view that given the nature of this matter, the interest of justice, the kinds of issues which relate to direct access, because this court has a discretion when it comes to direct access, and we'll refer to cases on that issue. The kinds of issues that the court's going to be considering under its just and equitable jurisdiction, that is 1.2 of our relief, and the Justice Malanga question, which is, could there be, and in what circumstances there be a mandamus against Parliament, and including Justice Jafta's question as to the role that Section 89(1)(c) plays, the question of defiance becomes relevant. But I would wish to turn to that as part of the basket. But may I go back to the SCA's judgment?
Mr. Katz, maybe you should give us the points that you want to address, because your time is not as almost unlimited as Mr. Trengrove's.
Yes. I do need to, on this question of the Public Protector's powers, I've indicated paragraph 47 and this question of the parallel process. We just want to make it clear that our view as in paragraph 47 on this question of the parallel process is concerned is that a subject to remedial action may, in appropriate circumstances, request another functionary to assist the target in respect of implementation of the remedial action. But what is not permissible, to the extent this isn't made clear in the SCA judgment, is what the target may not do is embark on a parallel investigation, and the words are in paragraph 52, in order to second guess the language used, the Public Protector's remedial action, and in order to perhaps at the end allow, and I'll use the words of the SCA, adopt the position that the outcome of that parallel process trumps the findings, decision, or remedial action taken by the Public Protector. So we would hold the SCA judgment to our bosom, and we would say that this court ought to uphold the kinds of language and the paragraphs 43 to 53 of the SCA judgment.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Katz. I'm interested in your answer to my colleague Justice Froneman's question. Is your answer that it makes no difference to the relief that the DA seeks, whether we find bad faith or whether we just find a violation?
Justice Cameron, if I may turn back to the prayers that we seek and touch upon that. For purposes of prayer 1.1, it makes no difference whether you find that the President made an error of law or otherwise. For purposes of prayer 1.2 and the type of order that the court might craft along the lines of 1.2, what is just and equitable, what is appropriate, that's where that issue will arise. And were the court to come to the conclusion, as we would urge, that there was defiance, then 1.2 perhaps was a little humble for the DA to ask. And the DA would well have been advised to ask for more. So that's the answer, Justice Cameron. But the court will decide as far as 1.2 is concerned. Similarly, as far as 2 and 3 are concerned, 2 and 3 are not dependent upon defiance. But if the court does define defiance, again, there would be an order along the lines of 1.2 added to 2 and 3, bearing in mind Justice Malanga's question and the debate that he had with Mr. Trengo. I would like to turn to the facts. And I'd made the point that on the facts this court may appropriately come to a conclusion of defiance. And I'd made the point that it wasn't simply after the remedial action was taken that the difficulties arose. And for this proposition, I wish to turn to page 102 of the Public Protector's report. That's page 99 of the DA the DA papers. This is foreshadowed in Mr. Self's affidavit on page 13 in paragraph 23. Perhaps I should read from Mr. Self, paragraph 23, and then turn to page 102 of the Public Protector's report. What Mr. Self tells the court is that during the course of her investigation, the Public Protector encountered considerable resistance from other organs of state, including and particularly from the President, for instance, and then there are various examples set out in paragraphs 23 and following. And perhaps I should just immediately turn to page 102. In paragraph 3.4.13, there is a discussion by the Public Protector of certain of the events that occurred during her investigation. And maybe it's worth me just reading 3.4.11 on a little bit up the page, 2 paragraphs up. The Chief State Law Advisor suggested that I should stop my investigation until the recommendations of the internal task team had been implemented and the investigations of the Auditor General and the Special Investigation Unit had been concluded. At the time of the conclusion of my investigation, no investigation had been conducted, etc. Then in paragraph 3.4.13, at a further meeting that took place on 31 May 2013, arguments were again advanced that it was improper of me to continue to investigate against the wishes of the ministers who were satisfied with the findings of the task team and decided the recommendation of the task team that the next phase should be investigation by the Auditor General and SIU. The Chief State Law Advisor, Mr. Enver Daniels, supported the ministers at the meeting in question, arguing at some point that, and we would highlight this, constitutionally speaking, it was improper for me to investigate when the ministers had clearly decided as members of the executive how they wanted the matter investigated.
Mr. Kurtz, who do you want to impute that to? To the President, to the National Assembly, or only to the ministers?
Justice Madlanga, we would submit, as we develop our argument, that this case goes far deeper than the question of the Public Protector's powers under remedial action. It goes to a systemic failure of government in general, and government including the other two branches, which includes the executive and the National Assembly as a whole, to hold to account that which is ultimately excessive, a homestead for one family with 250 million rand. And the question is, who does the DA wish to hold this question of blockage of the Public Protector's investigation to? And we hold it to all respondents, other than the Public Protector, all government respondents. Whether it's the Chief State Law Advisor, whether it's the ministers, ultimately the buck stops with the President. And the President takes responsibility for the conduct of state officials who block or attempt to block a constitutionally mandated body, a Chapter 9 institution, in this manner. So to answer Justice Madlaga, the answer is all government respondents in this case are liable and responsible for this kind of blockage.
Even the Speaker, the National Assembly?
Yes.
But what connection is there between the National Assembly, the Speaker, and the Chief Law Advisor? What authority does Parliament have over him? I thought he was part of the executive in a sense.
He's probably an official in the Department of Justice.
What authority does the Speaker have over that, or any part of Parliament?
The National Assembly have a duty, as Mr. Trengrove pointed out, to consider the report of the Public Protector, which includes that paragraph, and deal with it in a constitutionally proper manner. And they didn't.
That I understand, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Kurz, but I thought we were at a stage when an investigation was being conducted, and some officials, like the Chief State Law Advisor, were interfering or seeking to block the Public Protector in her attempt to do her work. I don't see how the National Assembly comes in. I have some understanding when you say the executive is in a way involved. I don't know how the Public Protector comes in. I don't even know how the Minister of Police has anything to do with with an official or a functionary in the Department or Ministry of Justice.
Chief Justice, there were certain ministers at the meeting. It was against the wishes of the ministers that the Public Protector continued her investigation. She makes that clear. I understand, Chief Justice, your question. But in order to answer the question, one must look at, we would submit, that the court should have regard to the context in which the National Assembly considered this report. It's not just a question of the National Assembly looking at paragraph 11 to read together with the President's response to paragraph 11, and as Mr. Trengrove would argue, paragraph 10. It's a question of the National Assembly considering this report as the Public Protector required as a whole. And when the National Assembly considers that there was this obstruction, it's something that the National Assembly, we would submit, had a duty under the sections that Mr. Trengrove mentioned, 181.3 and 55.2, to provide a mechanism that this kind of conduct should not occur in the future, whether it be from an official in the Department of Justice, ministers, or the President. That's the National Assembly's duty. And the fact that they didn't, but they rubber-stamped a whitewashing, if I may call it that, of the excess, we would submit, paints a picture which demonstrates what we would call a big picture of violence. I want to turn to another aspect of her report. And one knows that statistics sometimes, not always, but sometimes lie. But we would turn to page 405 of our report. It's page 251 of the DA papers. In paragraph 9.2.14 on page 250, the Public Protector says the extent of the difference between the expenditure incurred by the state in respect of the security measures installed at the private residences of former Presidents Botha, de Klerk, Mandela and Mbeki, and incurred at President Zuma's private residence is an indication that the enabling policy framework anticipated something more modest. This is so even if we take into account the location and remoteness of the area of Nkandla. And on the next page there's a table. And we would ask the court consider the table because it's illustrative of an issue that we're going to turn to as a general principle when it comes to something that the former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights stated. There's a graph, and the graph demonstrates, maybe it's on, I'm just called a graph, but it's this is called a pie, what is it called, a pie chart? Demonstrates vividly, it's on page 405 of the Public Protector's report. And we come back to this theme, whatever the powers or otherwise, or legal effect of the Public Protector's powers are, or were, or whether there was made an error of law by whomsoever, it seems to us that when one sees this graph and one looks at it, and one sees how the Minister of Police, how the National Assembly dealt with the difficulty that the Public Protector was investigating, and they came to the conclusion that there was no problem and that the President did not have to pay back a cent. One has to come to the conclusion that constitutionally there is something rotten. One cannot but come to that conclusion, that from a separation of powers point of view, to not hold the President to account by the National Assembly and for the Minister of Police to produce a report which has regard to a graph like this, we would submit requires constitutional invention by the courts. And I want to turn to
Mr. Katz. I'm sorry, Mr. Katz. I'm here.
Sorry, Justice Jafta.
Can I take you back to the threshold issue of direct access? Would I be correct to say that the DA only advances the convenience argument, which depends entirely on whether the EFF is granted direct access? If we refuse EFF direct access, the DA should be refused as well. Is that correct?
That's the way we have pleaded it in our notice of motion, which was drafted before the 8th of October 2015 when the SCA gave judgment. That's a game changer on the question of direct access. Because were the DA, well, let's assume the EFF to be refused direct access exclusive jurisdiction, and the DA were to be forced to continue back in the High Court, the inevitable consequence would be the High Court would have to rule in the DA's favour, bearing in mind the precedent of the SCA. The matter would then have to track through to the SCA, and then come back to this court, this matter. So the direct access issue has changed on the 8th of October 2015. That's number one. Number two, and I wish to refer to this court's jurisprudence in a case called Independent Newspapers versus Minister of Intelligence, 2008, Volume 5, SA 31, Constitutional Court, paragraphs 19 and 20 in particular, where this court stated, and perhaps, I believe Mr. Marcus was in the case, but if I remember correctly, and if I read the judgment properly, there was no application for direct access. But the court nevertheless granted direct access in terms of its discretion to do so for the reasons that are articulated in paragraphs 19 and 20. And what the court said was, in the present matter, the applicant, this is the newspapers, who applied for intervention, not direct access, intervention, does not have a direct and substantial interest in the subject matter of the underlying litigation. Its real and substantial interest rests elsewhere. It is to gain access to a relatively small but restricted part of the underlying record for public dissemination on the ground and the right of open justice. Strictly speaking, this claim it could assert without intervening in the underlying matter. And then the important point, Justice Jafta, it could have brought a self-standing application before the High Court, or in an appropriate case, an application for direct access before this court for the same relief it now seeks. And it seems to us that it didn't apply for direct access. It applied for intervention. It follows from what I've said that the application for intervention cannot succeed. That, however, is not the end of the matter. And this is the proposition that we advance. When it is in the interests of justice, it will be the test that this court considers. this court may permit a party to bring an application directly to it. There's no issue with that. For the reasons that follow, I'm convinced that it is in the interest of justice to dispose of this application as one of direct access. So even though it was an application for leave to intervene, which was rejected, the court said, well, for the next reasons, we grant direct access. Independent newspapers and the minister have acted under the mistaken belief they were entitled to intervene. That doesn't apply here. Even so, both want the dispute between them to finally decided to finality by us. That's not an issue in this case. The same issue applies. The President's made it clear he wishes finality, and I'll turn to his letter of last week for that proposition. All the EFF want finality, the DA want finality, the Public Protector wants finality, and one turns to paragraph 25 of her affidavit in the DA matter, and one sees the difficulties that are faced were this court not to hear this case at this point. And what goes on, this court goes on in the independent newspapers to say, both raise important constitutional questions which in all probability would have eventually ended up in this court, same in this case. Also, much proverbial water has run under the bridge, like in our case. The intervening parties have spent much effort and money to place the issues before this court in no less than 3 oral hearings, and in certain instances they were spurred on by directions of this court. In any event, this court is already seized with a record of proceedings in issue. Whilst it would have been preferable to have the benefit of a judgment of another court, sending the parties to another forum at this hour may well work an injustice. Another important consideration is none of the parties is opposed to us adjudicating the matter, and I cannot detect any prejudice or unfairness against any of the parties concerned if we were to do so. In my judgment, dictates of justice urge us on the path of finality. I will accordingly dispose of this matter as an application for direct access. And we would submit, Justice Jafta, that's the complete answer to any of the difficult questions of jurisdiction. We're here.
Well, Mr. Katz, you've confused me. Is it still a conditional application or not?
We would support the EFF's application alternative, the application alternative for direct access. We could well understand that were that application to be rejected, it would seem odd to us that you could grant the DA direct access and not grant the EFF direct access. But in bolstering the EFF's, let's call it alternative application for direct access, we would submit that it's not in the interest of justice that the EFF's application not be granted, and the DA certainly should follow suit. So Justice Jafta and Justice Frenneman, that's how we would articulate the answer to these questions.
But I thought the authority you referred us to spoke to a situation where there was a matter already before the court. Now, if we reject the EFF's application, the main and alternative, there will be nothing left. How can the DA say you still have to give me indirectly direct access to come in, even though there's no matter left for the court to consider?
No, Justice Jafta, the independent newspapers was a self-standing case for access to documents in another case. There was a line between the two cases. I appreciate that were the EFF to be out of court on a jurisdictional issue, whether it be exclusive jurisdiction or direct access, it would seem odd to us that the DA then should be granted direct access. I fully appreciate that. Was my answer to Justice Frenneman. But I have to answer the question but I have to, in answering the question, refer again to the interests of justice, and we would find it surprising were both applications, the EFF and the DA applications, not to be considered by this court from an interest of justice point of view, bearing in mind the water that's passed under the bridge, and in particular the 8th of October 2015 judgment of the SE and the President's most recent pronouncements on what he seeks. So we would submit that however the court frames it, and along the lines of the Mazibuko Eno versus Sisulu Eno case, this court must deal with the merits at this particular point. But we would submit that the direct access route is the preferable one for the reasons that Mr. Trengrove argued, where he spoke about this, the grey of the exclusive jurisdiction zones. And
Mr. Cass, a small administrative matter. You've been at it now for 40 minutes. You surrendered 30 to Mr. Trengrove. You have 10 minutes in which to make your final submissions. Will you do that, please?
Yes. Before, I would ask that the court have regard to two facts which are in the papers, and that's the letter of 21 August 2014 from the Public Protector and the President's response, which is on page 531 of the DA papers, in which we find errors of law contained in the President's letter to the Public Protector, where he says the role of the Public Protector is akin to that of an ombudsman, and this is quite apart from the SCA judgment in the SABC case. And importantly, we would emphasize that he says in paragraph 6, whilst the Public Protector reports play an important role, they are for a variety of reasons, the word is used, impregnable from review. So the President tells the Public Protector on the 11th of September 2014 that the Public Protector's report is not reviewable, despite on the 1st of June 2011, in the Mail and Guardian case, the Supreme Court of Appeal finding that Public Protector reports are reviewable. I want to turn to one last fact before I want to make a submission and then our closing remarks. The President's letter of last week contains 12 paragraphs. This is the letter to the court, and Justices Jafta and Fruneman, I would remind the court that the interests of justice test for direct access would include a statement from the President of the court, from the President of the country, where he says in paragraph 3, although procedural questions have been raised on behalf of the President, including this court's exclusive jurisdiction and direct access, the President says, matters which are ultimately forth, the need for finality is apparent. So in these unusual circumstances, the President has told the court that the need for finality is apparent, and it would fit into the kinds of ideas that this court spoke to in independent newspapers. But I do wish to emphasize paragraph 6, because it's not unimportant in our submission as a fact. In paragraph 6, the President says, he has proposed that the Auditor General and Minister of Finance designate an appropriate person each to carry out the exercise, the substitution for SAPS of the AG, an independent Chapter 9 institution with a mandate to strengthen constitutional democracy, can only enhance the process, etc. And that was obviously bearing in mind the changed circumstances arising from the controversy regarding the SAPS report. It wasn't a SAPS report, and this is important. It was a Minister of Police's report. The President confuses the distinction between the political office bearer of the Minister of Police and SAPS. The Public Protector required SAPS, who are not political bodies, there's a Commissioner of Police, to deal with the issue. And then the next, and there's a footnote 3, which deals with the President's answering affidavit in the DA application, in particular paragraph 54. And then the important sentence that we ask the court to consider in the most serious light. The EFF, DA and Public Protector have not responded to this proposal. The DA had responded to the proposal. And that the court will find on page 1213, the DA's reply of Mr. James Swelf of 20 November 2015, when paragraph 43, he qualifies what he said in 42, and he deals with that in terms, proposal by the President contained, as the reference indicates in the letter to the court, in paragraph 54 of the President's answering affidavit in the DA application. So when the President told the court that the DA have not responded, they, as a fact, have responded. The last point I wish to take from this letter is, as short time as a week ago in paragraph 10, the President tells the court that he's considered the proposal seriously and upon legal advice, etc., believes its acceptance will end a drawn-out controversy and promote nation building and unity. I don't want to get involved in the President's duties on nation building and unity, but I do want to emphasize this. The President approaches the matter on the basis of the issue of the exact nature of the public protector's remit is pending in a few weeks' time. That's, of course, no longer true. The President couldn't have known that. I understand that on the 3rd of February, the Chief Justice issued directions where that matter, which was scheduled to be heard on the 10th of March this year, has now been withdrawn. That was on the 3rd of February. That's last week. So it's the day after this letter. But then he says, and a practical arrangement between the parties endorsed by the court to implement, and what does he say a week ago? The recommendations in this instance. So as short a time as a week ago, the President maintains the stance in the letter to this court that the public protector's remedial action is a recommendation. And we would emphasize this in the big basket of facts, which starts with obstruction and ends with a week ago, to a letter to this court where he continues to suggest that they are mere recommendations. I do want, before I turn to the final conclusions, Chief Justice and Deputy Chief Justice, to make two, let's call it self-standing points in how we would submit, the DA submits, this court should consider the matter, and then I'll turn to the relief sought. The facts of what the President did and didn't do, and what the National Assembly did and didn't do, and the Minister of Police did or didn't do, are common cause, effectively. It's another factor, Justice Jafta, Justice Fruneman, as to why direct access is appropriate. There are no disputes of fact that a court needs to consider. And a fact is the graph that I referred to earlier in the Public Protector's report, which we would suggest. And we say this not every submission that we make is serious, but there's an extraordinary seriousness about what we're now going to say in two respects. There's been an abuse of public resources at an extraordinary scale for the benefit of one family in a country where most families barely can afford food, education, healthcare, and housing. And that is it's a breakdown of the rule of law on a certain level. And we want to say the cost of the breakdown of the rule of law, and we want to emphasize this, and how it impacts upon the realization of human rights and poverty alleviation is clearly demonstrated, particularly in this case. But we don't just say in this case that the 250 million rand could have been used for education or otherwise. It goes deeper than that. I'll come to why. Because obviously, common sense tells you that if one family benefits 250 million rand at the public purse, when there are, let's say, 100,000 people who would be able to eat for a year on that money, that's obviously a violation of some type of. But it goes deep, and I want to refer in this regard to what Ms. Pillay, Nabi Pillay, said when she was the UN Human Rights Commissioner, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. She said this in 2012. And she said the rule of law constitutes the backbone for the legal protection of human rights. So when one talks of the rule of law rather than, in this kind of case, the rule of man, and really is the difference. There's a rule of law and a rule of man. In this case, demonstrates why the rule of law is so important. But what she said was this: the rule of law constitutes the backbone for the legal protection of human rights. And what we want to submit is that it's not just lofty language in the Constitution about the supremacy of the rule of law in Section 1. It's got a real meaning for human beings on the ground, poor people who deserve their dignity to be respected, protected, promoted under Section 7.2. And that's what this case is about. It's a 7.2 case at its heart. So we read that to you, and we can give you the reference. Ms. Blizzard will give it to you. We found it in a book called New Rules for the Rule of Law in David Marshall, International Rule of Law Movement. And if the court wishes proofs of the book, we will say it with the registrar. The court can request, and Ms. Blizzard will make it available. But we want to turn to the relief sought. And in our notice...
I'm generously giving you 2 minutes, and then I'll stop you.
Thank you, Chief Justice. The prayer in paragraph 1.1 sorts under 172.1a. And we don't believe, or we would submit, that it would be difficult to argue that, bearing in mind the clear language of the section, number one, this court's consistent jurisprudence that where there has been a consideration of conduct in a constitutional setting and the failure or the conduct constitutes a failure to comply with what the section talks to, which in this case would be the law, and the law being the public protector's remedial action, the court is enjoined to issue the declaratory. We make that point in our heads of argument. Similar considerations apply to paragraphs 2 and 3 in respect of the Speaker, the National Assembly in paragraph 2, and the Minister of Police in respect of paragraph 3. 1.2 is different. It's a different type of prayer. It's a structural interdict of a kind, and we accept that perhaps in our formulation it may well have been better to have included in paragraph 1.2 a prayer that looks like 1.3.5. In other words, here we've asked the court to order the President to report back to this court by affidavit how he has complied with the remedial action. And what I suppose would be just and equitable, what we submit would be just and equitable, would be for at least the public protector, if not both the EFF and the DA, to be entitled in some way to respond to the President's report back, bearing in mind in particular the water that has passed under the bridge subsequent to the formulation of 1.2 by the DA before the 8th of October. And turning to costs, Chief Justice, we would submit that there would be no reason why, were, for example, only 1.1 to be granted, the DA shouldn't be entitled to its costs, including the costs of at least 3 counsel. We have 4. We understand that the costs of 3 counsel is unusual, and costs of 4 counsel is probably relatively rare. Couldn't find one. But here, the President has chosen 5 counsel, including 2 senior silks. And this is a matter of high constitutional importance, and there's much paper and very difficult and important issues, and we would ask that the court consider, under its just and equitable discretion, to go the rare route and give the DA a cost order to, indemnify all the cost that it's expended in this case, as it pleases the court.
Thank you, Mr. Kurtz. The court will adjourn for 15 minutes.
All right, well, live from the Constitutional Court there, those visuals where the economic freedom fighters and the Democratic Alliance case is being heard. Will Trengrove and Dalian Porfu are representing the EFF, so points being heard from them essentially revolving around the powers of the public protector and the upholding of the Constitution. For the DA, advocate Anton Katz defining the legal position of the public protector's powers. And then also on the sidelines of this court case, the EFF being led by Julius Malema are set to arrive at the court for their Pay Back the Money march, but we will have some further analysis and some discussion on these things that are currently underway from the Constitutional Court, as well as that march that's coming back up next after the break.